Right, so hello to all. Oh, there we are. So hello to everyone. Assuming of course that there is anyone out there who watches these or is here or will watch this later. I cannot say for sure. I've seen no evidence. Well, no, I've seen some evidence there are people out there. People who talk to me on the Bird app and come near and try to sell me things. So I guess there are some people out there. It's just that I don't see a lot of you. So if anyone is here, hello. Let me introduce myself. I am SkitterSkreetch. You can call me Skitter. I am a rat who was trapped inside of this here cursed library. Here we are, where I am compelled by the lamp you can see over in the corner there to read books for purposes which I do not fully understand. To be clear to anyone who's new to this screen you see now is not the whole library. This is just the good books which are pulled from the main library, which is mostly full of old, mouldering, bad books. Although today we've had quite a successful day at that. In fact, more books than any other day by quite a margin. So I will show you. First off, I mentioned earlier on the Bird thing that I'd found this one here. This book here by Robert Louis Stevenson, which is called The Body Snatcher. And I had an eye on a short story by Jack London, who we've read quite a bit of before. But while I was out looking for that Jack London, I happened, completely by chance, to come across another book by another person over here, which is this is something by someone called Aesop. I wonder if that's the last name, but it's The Dolphin, the Whale and the Gudgeon. Now, I know what a dolphin and a whale is, not too clear on a gudgeon, but seems like some sort of book about fish, which Lamp has said is good. So that's nice. But the real was got in our collection of Jack Londons, which, as you can see, has expanded by 4 old copies. Now, what should I call it? We've done quite a few Londons before. We did Call of the Wild, which was quite long, and White Fang, which was very long. And we've done The Build a Fire and Another Life yesterday we read. But we got here 4 of them, which I guess doubles our collection. They all sort of look the same or similar, which Lamp says is because these is from the same run of printing. So, but none of them is too long. So hopefully we're going to try and do them all tonight. Now I don't know if anyone is here watching this. Lamp. Okay, Lamp says that there is no one here but him and me. As is becoming something of a theme in these things. But if anyone does appear before we start, or is here and Lamp doesn't know about it, or is somehow present, feel free to let me know if you've got a preference for how we start with these. But given that it doesn't seem like anyone is here and present, my plan is to start with the ones that aren't the Londons. Probably the Stevenson. I don't know. Not entirely I don't mind either way, but I sort of want to save the Londons for last because I sort of know what he's about at this point. And yesterday we did the London first, and then we did that one by Steinbeck, and that were a bit of an heavy thing to end on. So I thought maybe we'd do one of these, and then or maybe both of them, and then do the Londons as sort of a cool down because I sort of know what to expect with him. But yeah, no one's here yet, Lamp? No, no one's here. Okay, well, the Bird app's good for it, right? What will we start with then? I mean, I guess we might as well start with the one that I'm looking at now. So let's start with this Aesop fellas, the Dolphins, the Whales, and the Gudgeon. Don't look to have any chapters in it, although it has maybe it has, I'm not sure. Or maybe it's like, it looks almost like the Shakespeare, but the sonnets, so maybe it's poems. I don't think it's, well, we'll go through it like we did. Right. So, the eagle, the jackdaw, and the shepherd. An eagle, dropping suddenly from an high rock, carried off a lamb. A jackdaw saw this, was smitten by a sense of rivalry, and determined to do the same. So, with a great deal of noise, he pounced upon a ram, but his claws merely got caught in the thick ringlets of the ram's fleece, and no matter how frantically he flapped his wings, he was unable to get free and take flight. Finally, the shepherd bestirred himself, hurried up to the jackdaw, and got hold of him. He clipped the end of his wings, and, when evening fell, he carried him back to his children. The children wanted to know what sort of bird this was, so the shepherd replied, "As far as I can see, it's a jackdaw, but it would like us to think it's an eagle. Just so, to compete with the powerful, he's not only not worth the effort and labour loss, but also brings mockery and calamity upon us." That last line there is in italics. Seems like these all come with a little aid in, then the story, and then a little italics afterwards. So we'll go through. The cat and the cock. A cat who had caught a cock wanted to give a plausible reason for devouring it. So she accused it of annoying people by crowing at night and disturbing their sleep. The cock defended himself by saying that he did it to be helpful, for he woke people up. It was to summon them to their accustomed work. Then the cat produced another grievance and accused the cock of insulting nature by his relationship with his mother and sisters. The cock replied that in this also he was serving his master's interests, since it was thanks to this the chickens got laid a lot of eggs. "Ah well," cried the cat, "I'm not going to go without food just because you can produce a lot of justification," and she ate the cock. This fable shows that someone with a wicked nature who is determined to do wrong, when he cannot do so in the guise of a good man, does his evil deeds openly. The goat and the donkey. A man kept a goat and a donkey. The goat became jealous of the donkey because it was so well fed. So she said to him, "What with turning the millstone and all the burdens you carry, your life is just a torment without end." She advised him to pretend to have epilepsy and to fall into a hole in order to get some rest. The donkey followed her advice, fell down, and was badly bruised all over. His master went to get the vet and asked him for a remedy for these injuries. The vet prescribed an infusion of goat's lung. This remedy would surely restore him to health. As a result, the man sacrificed the goat to cure the donkey. Whosoever schemes against others owes his own misfortune to himself. The two cocks and the eagle. Two cockerels were fighting over some hens. One triumphed and saw the other off. As defeated one then withdrew into a thicket where he hid himself. The victor fluttered up into the air and sat atop a high wall, where he began to crow with a loud voice. Straight away an eagle fell upon him and carried him off, and from then on the cockerel hidden in the shadow possessed all the ends at his leisure. This fable shows that the Lord resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. The fisherman and the large and small fish. A fisherman drew in his net from the sea. He could catch big fish, which he spread out in the sun, but the small fish slipped through the mesh, escaping into the sea. People of a mediocre fortune escape danger easily, but only rarely sees a man of great note escape when there is disaster. These are odd. Each one of these is like a small little story on itself with a little. It feels weird because normally I do analysis after these, but each one of these is its own little story and then has its own little analysis. I'm not sure I agree with all of them. The fox and the woodcutter. A fox who was fleeing ahead of some hunters saw a woodcutter and pleaded with him to find a hiding place. The woodcutter promised to hide him in his hut and did so. Some moments later the huntsman arrived and asked the woodcutter if he had seen a fox in the vicinity. He replied in words that he had not seen one go past, but by signalling with his hands he indicated where the fox was hidden. The huntsman, however, took no notice of his gestures and simply took him at his word. After they had gone, the fox emerged from the hut without saying anything. When the woodcutter approached him for showing no gratitude for having saved him, the fox replied, "I think that if your gestures and your conduct had agreed, I would thank you if your gestures and your conduct had agreed with your words." One could apply this fable to men who make protestations of virtue, but who actually behave like rascals. The fox and the billy goat. A fox, having fallen into a well, was faced with the prospect of being stuck there. But then a billy goat came along that same well because he was thirsty and saw the fox. He asked him if the water were good. The fox decided to put a brave face on it and gave a tremendous speech about how wonderful the water was down there, so very excellent. So the billy goat climbed down the well, thinking only of his thirst. When he had a good drink, he asked the fox what he thought was the best way to get back up again. The fox said, "Well, I have a very good way to do that. Of course, it will mean our working together. If you just push your front feet up against the wall and hold your horns high up in the air as you can, I will climb on to get out, and then I can pull you up behind me. The billy goat willingly consented to this idea, and the fox briskly clambered up the legs, the shoulders, and finally the horns of his companion. He found himself at the mouth of the well, pulled himself out, and immediately scampered off. The billy goat shouted after him, reproaching him for breaking their agreement and mutual assistance. The fox came back to the top of the well and shouted down to the billy goat, "Ha! If you had as many brains as you have hairs on your chin, you wouldn't have got down there in the first place without thinking of how you were going to get out again." He is thus that the sensible men should not undertake any action without having first examined the end result. That seems a little unfair. The fox was equally as foolish. Providence saved him. Man bitten by an ant and Hermes. One day a sailing ship sank to the bottom of the sea with all its passengers. A man who was witness of the shipwreck claimed that the decrees of the gods were unjust. For to lose a single impious person, they had also made the innocent perish. There were a great many ants on the spot where he was standing. As he was saying this, it happened that one of them bit him. In order to kill it, he crushed them all. Then Hermes appeared to him and struck him with his wand, Rabdos, saying, "And now do you not admit that the gods judge men in the same way that you judge ants? Don't blaspheme against the gods. When misfortune befalls you, examine your own faults." That doesn't exactly... I don't know that I like the analysis that he's given. Seems to me that the idea that men is so far beneath the gods as ants is beneath men is a pretty horrible idea. If when you're a man, of course. I mean, I'm a rat, so I'm sort of used to that, but grim. Don't think it would make me well inclined to the gods. The cheat. A poor man, being very ill and getting worse, promised the gods to sacrifice to them 100 oxen if they saved him from death. The gods, wishing to put him to the test, restored him to health very quickly. Soon he was up and out of bed. But as he didn't really have any oxen, he modelled 100 of them out of tallow and burned them on an altar, saying, "Receive my voted offering, O gods." But the gods, wanting to trick him in their turn, said in their dreams, saying that if he would go to the seashore, it would result in 1,000 Athenian drachmas for him. Unable to contain his joy, he ran to the beach, where he came across some pirates, who took him away and sold him into slavery. And they did indeed obtain 1,000 Athenian drachmas for him. This fable is well applied to a liar. Where did he get? If he didn't have 100 oxen, if he didn't have any oxen, where did he get tallow and make oxen? Don't tallow come from cows? Why do I know this? I'm not sure I like this book. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's a good one. Oh well. A man and a lion travelling together. A man and a lion were travelling along together one day, when they began to argue about which of them were the stronger. Just then they passed a stone statue representing a man strangling a lion. "There, you see, we are stronger than you," said the man, pointing out at the lion. But the lion smiled and replied, "If lions could make statues, you'd see plenty of men under the paws of lions." Many people boast of how brave and fearless they are, but when put to the test are exposed as frauds. I'm pretty sure I've seen statues of men being clawed by lions. No. The bear and the fox. A bear once boasted to a fox that he had a great love for mankind, since he made it a point never to eat a corpse. The fox replied, "I wish to heaven you would mangle the dead rather than the living." This fable unmasks the cowardice who live in hypocrisy and vainglory. The frogs who demanded a king. The frogs, annoyed with the anarchy in which they lived, sent a deputation to Zeus to ask him to give them a king. Zeus, seeing that they were very simple creatures, threw a piece of wood into their marsh. The frogs were so alarmed by the sudden noise they plunged into the depths of the bog. When the piece of wood did not move, they clambered out again. They developed such a contempt for this new king that they jumped on his back and crouched down. The frogs were deeply ashamed of having such a king, so they sent a second deputation to Zeus asking him to change their monarch. The first were too passive and did nothing. Zeus now became impatient with them and sent down a water serpent, Hydra, which seized them and ate them all up. This fable teaches us that it is better to be ruled by passive, worthless men who bear no spitefulness than by productive but wicked ones. I think there are better options than those. I think there is like a third good option there, but okay. The ox driver and Heracles. An ox driver will bring in a wagon towards a town. The wagon fell down into a deep ravine, but instead of doing anything to get it out, the ox driver stood without doing a thing, and merely invoked Heracles among all the gods, whom he particularly honoured. Heracles appeared to him and said, "Put your hand to the wheels and goad the oxen, and do not invoke the gods without making some effort yourself. Otherwise you'll invoke them in vain." And this one doesn't have a little italic bit afterwards. The Ass Ferret and Aphrodite. An ass ferret, having fallen in love with an handsome young man, begged Aphrodite, goddess of love, to change her into a human girl. The goddess took pity on this passion and changed her into a gracious young girl. The young man, when he saw her, fell in love with her and led her to his home. As they rested in the nuptial chamber, thalamus, Aphrodite, wanting to see if changing the body the house ferret had also changed in character, released a mouse in the middle of the room. The ass ferret, forgetting her present condition, leapt up from the bed and chased the mouse in order to eat it. Then the indignant goddess changed her back to her former state. Italics, bad people who change their appearance do not change their character. I mean, that seems like a very strange interpretation. Like, bad people don't change their character? I mean, I know ferrets can be vicious, but it seems a very unfair judgment of a person to change and then be expected to be perfect after. I don't know. Seems very silly. The house ferret and the file. An house ferret slipped into a blacksmith's workshop and began to lick the file that she found there. It happened that using her tongue thus, the blood flowed from it, but she was delighted, imagining that she had extracted something from the iron, and in the end she lost her tongue. This fable is aimed at people who pick arguments with others, thereby doing harm to themselves. That one I sort of understand, but... The ploughman and the frozen snake. One winter, a ploughman found the snake stiff with cold. He took pity on it, picked it up and put it under his shirt. When the snake had warmed up again against the man's chest, it reverted to its nature, struck out and killed its benefactor. When he realised that he was dying, the man bemoaned, "They are well deserved for taking pity on such a wicked wretch." This fable shows that perversity in nature does not change under the influence of kindness. I mean, I sort of want to argue that it's a very judgmental tale, but at the same time, snakes is vicious things. I fear them more than any animal, as does any sensible rat. That said, you have to be a lunatic to put a snake under your shirt. Anyway. The wife and her drunken husband. There were a woman whose husband were a drunkard. To get the better of him in his vice, she devised a plan. She waited for the moment where her husband was so drunk where he was like a corpse. Then she heaved him up over her shoulder, carried him to the cemetery and dumped him there. When she thought he had slept it off, she went back to the cemetery and knocked on the door of the vault. "Who's that at the door?" the drunken cried out. "It's me who comes to bring food for the dead," replied his wife mournfully. "Don't bring me anything to eat, my good man. Bring me more to drink. You distress me by talking about food and not drink." The wife, beating her breast, cried out, "Alas, how miserable am I! My plan has had no effect on you, husband, but not only are you not sober, but you have become even worse. Your weakness has now become second nature to you. This fable shows that you shouldn't become habituated to a loose way of life, but there comes a time when habit forces itself upon you, whether you like it or not." Does it? It doesn't seem like it demonstrates that at all. Like, it's understood by the fact that this person is a drunkard, that drunkenness is already upon them and forced upon them. It just seems like a demonstration of a strange book. Lam, are you sure this is a good book? You really should. This seems like a very poor book by the standards of the books we read. I can't think of a worse one. I mean, maybe we've just been getting books that are in the higher end of good, and this is the lot. I don't know. Is it really? It seems very sort of right. The woman and the hen. A widow had a hen which laid an egg every day. She imagined that if she gave the hen more barley, it would lay twice a day, so she increased the hen's ration accordingly. But the hen became fat and wasn't even capable of laying one egg a day. This fable shows that if through greed you look for more than you have, you lose even that which you do possess. I'm not sure that these show what they're meant to be showing, really. I think the fable shows that that hens generally lay one egg a day. Dolphin, the Whales and the Gudgeon. Here we go, it's the title story. Some dolphins and some whales were engaged in battle. As the fight went on and became desperate, a gudgeon poked his head above the surface of the water and tried to reconcile them. But one of the dolphins retorted, "It is less humiliating for us to fight to the death between ourselves than to have you for a mediator." Similarly, certain nobodies think they are somebody when they interfere in a public row. I don't... Maybe this would make more sense if I knew what a gudgeon was, but it does seem just like a thing that happened and then we're supposed to draw some... I'm just going to keep going through these. I'm going to stop commenting. The stag at the spring and the lion. The stag, oppressed by thirst, came to the spring to drink. After having a drink, he saw the shadowy figure of himself in the water. He much admired his fine antlers, their grandeur and extent, but he was disconcerted with his legs, which he thought looked like thin and feeble. He remained there, deep in reverie, when suddenly a lion sprang out at him and chased him. The stag fled rapidly and ran a great distance, for the stag's advantage is his legs, whereas the lion's is his heart. As long as they were in open ground, the stag easily outdistanced the lion, but they entered a wooded area. The stag's antlers became entangled in the branches, bringing him to a halt so that he was caught by the lion. As they were on the point of death, the stag said, "How unfortunate I am! My feet, which I had denigrated, could have saved me, whereas my antlers, on which I had prided myself, has caused my death." And thus, in dangerous situations, it is often the friends whom we suspect who save us, while those on whom we rely betray us. Just going to finish this and then comment here. The kid on the roof of the house and the wolf. A kid who had wandered on the roof of an house saw a wolf pass by, and he began to insult and jeer at it. The wolf replied, "Are you there? It's not you who mock me, but the place on which you are standing." This fable shows that often it is the place and the occasion which give one the daring to defy the powerful. The two enemies. Two men who loathed each other were sailing in the same boat. One took up his position at the stern and the other at the prow. A storm blew up, and the boat was on the point of sinking. The man at the stern asked the helmsman which part of the vessel was to go down first. "The prow," he said. "Then," replied the man, "death will no longer be sad for me if I can see my enemy die first." This fable shows that many people are not in the least disturbed at the arm that fools them, provided they can see their enemy's downfall first. Humans is mad. The sun and the frogs. It was summer and people were celebrating the wedding feast of the sun. All the animals were rejoicing at the event, and only the frogs were left to join the gay. A protesting frog called out, "Fools, how can you rejoice? The sun dries out all the marshland. If he takes a wife and has a child similar to himself, imagine how much more we would suffer." Plenty of empty-headed people are jubilant about things which they have no cause to celebrate. The mule. A mule who had grown fat on barley began to get frisky, saying to herself, "My father is a fast-running horse, and I take after him in every way." But one day she was forced to run a race. At the end of the race she looked glum and remembered that her father was really an ass. This fable shows that even if circumstances put a man on show, he ought never to forget his origins, for life is full of uncertainty. The old horse. An old horse had been sold to a miller to turn the millstone. When he were harnessed to the mill wheel, he groaned and exclaimed, "From the turn of the racecourse I am reduced to such a turn as this." Don't be too proud of useful strength, for many a man's old age is spent in hard work. The camel seen for the first time. When they first set eye on a camel, men were afraid. All by its huge size they ran away. But when in time they realised its gentleness, they plucked up enough courage to approach it. And gradually realising that it had no temper, they went up to it and grew to hold it in such contempt that they put a bridle on it and gave it to the children to lead. This fable shows that habit can overcome the fear which awesome things inspire. The walnut tree. A walnut tree which grew on the edge of a path, constantly hit by a volley of stones. It said to itself with a sigh, "How unlucky I am that year after year I attract insults and suffering." This fable is aimed at people who don't withdraw from a source of annoyance for their own good. Trees can't move. Lamp, this is a bad book. You are incorrect about this book. This book is bad. What am I supposed to be? Lamp, this is just wrong in several ways. Not only does it have little stories that don't really have any substance to them and then tell you what they're supposed to mean, it's also wrong about what they're supposed to mean, because they don't mean what it says they mean. What? Okay, so Lamp tells me that this is a good book, not because it's necessarily good in of itself, because it informs other important books that are good and you need it to get content. That doesn't sound like it makes it a good book. In fact, it sounds like if this is a bad book and it inspires other books, those books themselves would also be... Oh, well. Whatever. I'm getting cheese, it's fine, I'm just gonna finish. The gardener watering the vegetables. A man passed as a gardener who was watering his vegetables, and he stopped to ask him why the wild vegetables were flourishing and vigorous while the cultivated ones were sickly and puny. The gardener replied, "It's because the earth is a mother to the one and a stepmother to the other. Similarly, the children fed by a stepmother are not nourished like those who have their true mother." A grim take on things. A Kithra player devoid of talent sang from morning to night in an house with a thickly plastered walls. As the walls echoed with his own sound, he imagined that he had a very beautiful voice. He so overestimated his own voice from then on that he decided to perform in a theatre. But he sang so badly on the stage that he was driven off by people throwing stones. Now, certain orators, who at school seem to have some talent, reveal their incompetence as soon as they enter the political arena. Why is this fellow who's a Kithra player, whatever a Kithra is, singing? And if he hears himself echoed, how is it that he thinks he's good? He's hearing himself. The gnat and the bull. The gnat had settled on a bull's horn. After he'd been there for a while and was about to fly off, he asked the bull whether he would, after all, like him to go away. The bull replied, "When you came I didn't feel you, and when you go I won't feel you either. I'm going to apply this fable to the feeble person whose presence or absence is neither helpful nor harmful." The aging lion and the fox. A lion who was getting old and could no longer obtain his food by force decided that he must resort to trickery instead. So he retired to a cave and lay down pretending to be ill. Thus, whenever any animals came into his cave to visit him, he ate them, all as they appeared. When many animals had disappeared, a fox figured out what was happening. He went to see the lion, but stood a safe distance outside the cave, and asked him how he was. "Ah, not very well," said the lion, "but why didn't you come in?" But the fox said, "I would come inside if I hadn't seen this. There are a lot of footprints are pointing inwards towards your cave, but none are pointing out. And men note the indication of dangers, and wise men note the indication of dangers and thus avoid them." The snake, the house ferret, and the mice. The snake and an house ferret were fighting each other in a certain house where they lived. The mice of the house, who were forever being eaten by one or the other of them, came quietly out of their holes when they heard them fighting. At the sight of the mice, the two combatants gave up their battle and turned on the mice. It is the same in the city-states, Polion. People who interfere in the quarrels of the demagogues become, without suspecting it, the victims of both sides. I don't think this man ever spoke to any mice. I don't think any mice would be that stupid. The snake and the crab. A snake and a crab frequented the same place. The crab continually behaved towards the snake in all simplicity and kindness. The snake were always cunning and perverse. The crab ceaselessly urged the snake to behave towards him with honesty and to imitate his own merit towards him. He did not listen. So indignant, the crab waited for an occasion when the snake were asleep, grabbed it and killed it. Seeing it stretched out dead, the crab called out, "Hey friend, it's no use being straight now that you are dead. You should have done that when I were urging you before. Then you wouldn't have had to be put to death." One could rightly tell this fable with regard to people who, during their life, are wicked towards their friends and do them a service after their death. I feel like if you tell someone to be a good person and then when they don't do what you tell them, you murder them, you're a bad person. I mean, I don't like snakes. This does not... I'm finding this a very frustrating book, but I'm more than half done. So, The Trodden on Snake and Zeus. The snake, heavily trodden up on so often by men's feet, went to Zeus to complain. Zeus said to it, "If you had bitten the first one who trod on you, the second one would not have tried to do so." This fable shows that those who hold their own against the first people who attack them make themselves formidable to others who do so. Wow. The child catching locust and the scorpion. The child was catching locusts in front of the city wall. After having caught a certain number of them, he saw a scorpion. He took it for a locust and, cupping his hands, was about to put it in his palm, when the scorpion, rearing his spike, said to the child, "Would that you had done that, but then you would have lost the locust that you have already caught." This fable shows that we should not behave in the same way towards good and wicked people. Wow. The child and the raven. A woman consulted the diviners about her infant son. They predicted that he would be killed by a raven, Corax. Terror-stricken by this prediction, she had a huge chest constructed and shut the boy inside it to prevent him from being killed by a raven. And every day at a given time she opened it and gave the child as much food as he needed. Then one day, when she had opened the chest and was putting the lid back on, the child foolishly stuck his head out. So it happened that the Corax, Brach's hooked handle on the chest, fell down onto the top of his head and killed him. There's not a written moral after that. I guess something about fate being fate. The flea and the man. Once a flea were irritating a man relentlessly, so he caught it and he said to it, "Who are you who makes a meal of all my limbs, biting me all over at random?" The flea answered, "That's the way we live. Don't kill me, for I can't do much harm." The man started to laugh and said, "You're going to die now at my hands. For however great or small the harm, it is imperative to stop you from breeding." This fable shows that it is not necessary to take pity on the wicked, however strong or feeble they may be. The jackdaw and the ravens. A jackdaw who grew larger inside than the other jackdaws disdained their company, so he took himself off to the ravens and asked if he could share his life with them. But the ravens, unfamiliar with his shape and his voice, mobbed him and chased him away. So rejected by them, he went back to the jackdaws. But the jackdaws, outraged at his defection, refused to have him back. Thus he was an outcast from the society of both jackdaws and ravens. It's similar with people, those who abandon their own country in preference for another are in low esteem there for being foreigners, but despised by their compatriots because they have scorned them. A man bitten by a dog. A man who had been bitten by a dog roamed far and wide looking for someone to heal his wound. Someone told him all he had to do was wipe the blood from his wound with some bread and throw the bed to the dog which had bitten him. To this the injured man replied, "If I did that, every dog in the city would bite me." Similarly, if you indulge someone's wickedness, you provoke him to do even more harm. The sleeping dog and the wolf. The dog lay asleep in front of a farm building. The wolf pounced at him and was going to make a meal of him when the dog begged him not to eat him straight away. At the moment, he said, "I am thin and lean. Await a little while. My master will be celebrating a wedding feast, and I will get some good mouthfuls and will fatten up and will be a much better meal for you." The wolf believed him and went on his way. A little while later, he come back and found the dog asleep on top of the house. He stopped below and shouted up to him, reminding him of their agreement. Then the dog said, "Oh wolf, if you ever see me asleep in front of the farm again, don't wait for the wedding banquet." This fable shows that wise people, when they get out of a fix, take care of themselves all the rest of their life. The dog with a bell. The dog furtively bit people, so his master rang a bell on him to warn everyone who would come in. Then the dog, shaking his bell, spraggled about in the agora. An old bitch said to him, "What have you got to strut about? You don't wear the bell as a result of any virtue, but to advertise your secret ill nature. Secret spitefulness of boastful people is exposed by their vainglorious behaviour." The wolf and the lamb. A wolf saw a lamb drinking at a stream and so wanted to devise a suitable pretext for devouring it. So although he was himself upstream, he accused the lamb of muddying the water and preventing him from drinking. The lamb replied that he only drank with the tip of his tongue and that, besides that being downstream he couldn't muddy the water upstream. All stratagem having collapsed, he replied, "Last year you insulted my father. I wasn't even born then," replied the lamb. So the wolf resumed, "Whatever you say to justify yourself, I will eat you all the same." This is the same as the cat story. Fable shows that when some people decide upon doing harm in the fairest defence, this is the same as the story with the cat and the rooster. The wolf and the young lamb taking refuge in a temple. A wolf pursued the young lamb who took refuge in a temple. The wolf called out to it and said that the sacrificer would offer it up to the god if he found the lamb there. The lamb replied, "Ah well, I would prefer to be the victim of a god than to die by your hand." This fable shows that if one is being driven towards death, it's better to die with honour. The diviner. The diviner was sitting plying his trade in the agora. Suddenly someone rushed up to him and said that the front door of his house was wide open and the contents gone. The diviner leapt up in consternation and ran home, gasping to see what had happened. A passer-by who had saw him run called out, "Hey there, you who pride yourself in foretelling the future for others, can't you foresee what will happen to yourself?" One could apply this fable to people who order their own lives woefully but who dabble in controlling affairs which are not their concern. The field mouse and the town mouse. A field mouse had a town mouse for a friend. The field mouse invited the town mouse to dinner in the country. When he saw that there were only barley and corn to eat, the town mouse said, "Do you know, my friend, that you can live like an ant? I, on the other hand, have an abundance of good things. Come on with me and I will share it all with you." So they set off together. The house mouse showed his friend some beans and bread flour, together with some dates, cheese, honey and fruit. And the field mouse was filled with wonder and blessed him with all his heart, cursing his own lot. Just as they were preparing to start their meal, a man suddenly opened the door. Alarmed by the noise, the mice rushed fearfully into the crevices. Then, as they crept out again to taste some of the dried figs, someone else came into the room and started looking for something. So they again rushed down the holes to hide. Then the field mouse, forgetting his hunger, sighed and said to his friend, "Farewell, my friend. You can eat your fill and be glad of art, at the price of 1,000 fears and dangers. My poor little thing will go on living by nibbling barley and corn without fear or suspicion of anyone." This fable shows that one should live simply and free from passion instead of luxuriously in fear and dread. I mean, I know it's mice, not rats, but objectively incorrect. The countryside is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than a city. Right. The bat, the bramble, and the gull. The bat, the bramble, and the gull met up with the intention of doing a bit of trading together. The bat went out and borrowed some money to fund the enterprise. The bramble contributed a lot of cloth to be sold, and the gull brought a large supply of copper to sell. They then set sail to go trading, but a violent storm arose which capsized their ship and all the cargo were lost. They were able to save nothing but themselves from the shipwreck. Ever since that time, the gull has searched the seashore to see if any of his copper might have washed up somewhere. The bat, fearing his creditors, dare not go out by day and only feeds at night, and the bramble clutches the clothes of all those who pass by, hoping to recognise a familiar piece of material. This fable shows that we always return to those things in which we have a stake. The woodcutter and Hermes. A woodcutter who was chopping wood on the banks of a river had lost his axe. Not knowing what to do, he sat himself down on the bank and wept. The god Hermes, learning the cause of his distress, took pity on him. Hermes plunged into the river, brought out a golden axe, and asked the woodcutter if this were the one which he had lost. The man said no, that wasn't the one. So Hermes dived back in again, and this time he produced a silver axe. But the woodcutter said no, that wasn't his axe either. Hermes plunged in the third time and brought out his own axe. The man said yes, indeed, this was the very axe that he had lost. Then Hermes, charmed by his honesty, gave him all three. Returning to his friend, the woodcutter told him about his adventure. One of them took it in his head to get himself some axes as well, so he set off for the riverbank, threw his axe in the current deliberately, and then sat down in tears. Then Hermes had appeared to him also, and learning the cause of his tears, he dived down and brought him a golden axe, asking if it was the one that he lost. The man, all joyful, cried out, "Yes, it is indeed the one." And the god, horrified at such effrontery, not only withheld the golden axe, but didn't return the man's own. This fable shows that the gods honour honest people, but are hostile to the dishonest. The ass carrying salt. An ass with a load of salt was crossing a stream. He slipped and fell in the water. Then the salt dissolved, and when he got up his load was lighter than before, so he delighted. Another time we arrived at the bank of a stream with a load of sponges. He thought that if he fell in the water again, when he got up, the load would be lighter. So he slipped on purpose. But of course the sponges swelled up with water, and the ass were unable to get up again, so he drowned and perished. Thus it is that sometimes people don't suspect they use their own tricks which land them in danger. I think it means that people have to adjust to their circumstances, but whatever. The ass, the cock, and the lion. One day an ass and a cockerel were feeding together when a lion attacked the ass. The cockerel let out a loud crow, and the lion fled, for lions are afraid of the sound of a cock crowing. The ass imagined the lion would flee because of him, and did not hesitate to rush after him. When he pursued the lion for about the distance where a cock's crow can no longer be heard, the lion turned around and devoured him. As he would die, and the ass prayed, "What an unfortunate and stupid fellow I am! Why did I, who was not born to all our parents, set out to fight?" This fable shows that the enemy is often betrayed as of no consequence, but when we attack him, he destroys us. The ass and the lapdog, or the dog and its master. There was a man who owned a Maltese lapdog and an ass. He was always playing with the dog. When he dined out, he would bring back tidbits and throw them at the dog when it rushed up, wagging its tail. The ass was jealous of this, and one day trotted up and started frisking around his master. This resulted in the man getting a kick on the foot, and he grew very angry, so he drove the ass with a stick back to his manger where he tied it up. This fable shows that we are not all made to do the same thing. This fable shows that if we seek a fair reward for which we service, sometimes we'll just get kicked the crap out of the water. The ass was taken for a lion. An ass, clothed in the skin of a lion, passed himself off in the eyes of everyone as a lion and made everyone flee from him, both men and animals. But the wind came along and blew off the lion's skin, leaving him naked and exposed. Everyone then fell upon him when they saw this and beat him with sticks and clubs. Be poor and eat ordinary, don't have pretensions to wealth, for you will be exposed to ridicule and danger, for we cannot adopt ourselves to that which is alien to us. A bird catcher in the wild and domesticated pigeons. A bird catcher spread his nets and tied his domesticated pigeons to them. Then he withdrew and watched from a distance what would happen. Some wild pigeons approached the captive birds and became entangled in the snares. The bird catcher ran back and started to grab them. As he did so, they reproached the domesticated pigeon because, being of the same race, they should have warned them of the trap. The domesticated pigeons replied, "We are more concerned with preventing our master's displeasure than with pleasing our kindred." Thus it is with domestic slaves. You can't blame them when, for love of their masters, they fail to show love towards their own kind. I think you can blame them in that case. The hen and the swallow. An hen found the eggs of a snake and carefully hatched them by sitting upon them and keeping them warm. A swallow, who had seen her doing this, said to her, "What fool you are! Why are you rearing these creatures who, once grown, will make you the first victim of their own evil doing?" Thus it cannot be tamed even by the kindest treatment. This is the same as the snake and the man who put it in the shadow. The partridge and the man. The man caught a partridge while hunting and was about to kill it. She pleaded with him, "Let me live. In my place I would bring you lots of partridges." "All the more reason to kill you," replied the man, "since you wish to ensnare your friends and comrades." This shows that the man who weaves a plot against his friends will himself fall dead. So, the partridge is wicked for doing this, but the domestic pigeons, they're fine. That's not wicked of them. The monkey and the camel. In the assembly of the beasts, the monkey got up and danced. He were enthusiastically applauded by everyone present. A jealous camel wanted to earn the same praise. He got up and also tried to dance, but he did such an absurd thing that the other animals became disgusted and beat him out of their sight with a stick. It's able to sit with those people who, through envy, compete with those who are their betters. Like Aesop, competing with others at writing stories. The mole and his mother. The mole was a blind creature, said to his mother that he could see. Put him to the test, his mother gave him a grain of frankincense, libanotos, and asked him what it was. "It's a pebble," he said. "My child," replied the mother, "not only bereft of sight, but you've also lost your sense of smell." Similarly, boastful people promise the impossible and are proved powerless in the most simple affairs. And that's the end of that book. That were a long one. It took quite a lot of my time, and I do not feel I gained anything from reading it. I think that's the first book we've read that I've really disliked. Still, I've got to do a little bit of analysis. I mean, several of those did seem to be repeats of the same story or have contradictory messages. The fact that they spelled out at the end what their moral was supposed to be was bad, because it sort of undercut the story. I mean, I would say it undercut the ability of the story to tell what it was for itself, but they didn't do that. They didn't tell what they was for themselves, because they was wrong. So, I suppose they was necessary, but at that point, if you're going to tell a story that doesn't say what you're going to say it says, why tell the story at all? Why not just do a little snippet at the end? I mean, I disagree with a lot of the little snippets as well. This book reminds me of that Dotes for Husbands book we read, where each of them's a little bit self-contained, but that had a lot of sensible advice, or at least well-meaning advice, and this was just bad. I do not care for this book. I think it is a poor one. Still, what are you going to do about it? Right. I sort of want to go do a London as a palate cleanser, but I am up here, and the Stevenson one is pretty short comparatively, I think. I mean, I guess that one was shorter than I expected it to be, because it were all only little bits, but I think this one should be no longer than that one at least. A little drink of water. Maybe I've been spoiled. I've had a lot of good books. I think yesterday especially, that Steinbeck one were very... I mean, there were a lot, but were very well written. So maybe I'm being a bit unfair to Aesop, but I can't think of a worse book that we've read, that I've read. I'll say we like there's people there. There's still no one else here, is there? No. And also that Aesop fella didn't even have any rats in his book. I mean, you're gonna have an animal story, you're not gonna have any rats at all. Yeah, he's the best animal. Fundamental foolishness. No wonder. No wonder. One of these days I'll find a book about rats and that'll be a good book. Still, for now, let us try on The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson. Every night in the year, 4 of us sat together in the small parlour of the George at Debenham, the undertaker and the landlord and Fetz and myself. Sometimes there would be more, but blow high, blow low, come rain or snow or frost, we 4 would be each planted in his own particular armchair. Fetz was an old drunken Scotchman, a man of education obviously, and a man of some property since he lived in idleness. He'd come to Debenham years ago while still young, and by mere continuance of living had grown to be an adopted townsman. His blue camlet cloak were a local antiquity, like the church spire, His place in the parlour at George, his absence from church, his old crapulous, disreputable vices were all things, of course, in Debenhams. He had some vague radical opinions and some fleeting infidelities, which he would now and again set forth and emphasise with tottering slaps upon the table. He drank rum, 5 glasses, regularly every evening, and for the greater portion of his nightly visit to the George sat with his glass in his right hand in a state of melancholy, alcoholic saturation. We called him the doctor, for he was supposed to have some special knowledge of medicine, and had been known upon a pinch to set a fracture or reduce a dislocation. But beyond these slight particulars, we had no knowledge of his character and antecedents. One dark winter night, it had struck 9 and some time before the landlord joined us. There were a sick man in the George. A great neighbouring proprietor suddenly struck down with apoplexy on his way to Parliament. The great man's still greater London doctor had been telegraphed to his bedside. For the first time such a thing had happened in Debenhams, for the railway was but newly opened, and we were all proportionally moved by the occurrence. "He's come," said the landlord after he had filled and lighted his pipe. "He?" said I. "Oh, not the doctor." "Himself," replied our host. "What's his name?" "Dr. McFarlane," said the landlord. Betts was far through his 3rd tumbler, stupidly fuddled now, nodding over, now staring amazingly around him. But at the last word he seemed to awaken, and repeat the name. "McFarlane," twice quietly enough the first time, but with a sudden emotion the second. "Yeah," said the landlord, "that's his name, Dr. Wolfe McFarlane." Betts became instantly sober. His eyes awoke, his voice became clear, loud, and steady, his language forcible and earnest. We were all startled by the transformation, as if a man had risen from the dead. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I'm afraid I have not been paying much attention to your talk. Who is this Wolfe McFarlane?" And then, when he had heard the landlord out, "It cannot be, he added. "Nay, I would like well to see him face to face." "Do you know him, doctor?" asked the undertaker with a gasp. "God forbid," was the reply. "Yet the name is a strange one, and too much to fancy too. Tell me, landlord, is he old?" "Well," said the host, "he's not a young man, to be sure, and his hair is white, but he looks younger than you. He is older, though, years older, but," with a slap on the table, "it's the rum, you see, in my face, rum and sin. This man perhaps may have an easy conscience and a good digestion. Conscience, hear me speak. You would think I was some old decent Christian, would you not? No, not I. I never canted. Voltaire might have canted, if he'd stood in my shoes, but the brains—" The rattling flip of his bald head. "The brains were clear and active, and I saw and made no deductions." "If you know this, doctor," I ventured to remark after a somewhat awful pause, "I should gather that you do not share the landlord's good opinion." Best paid no regard to me. "Yes," he said with sudden decision, "I must see him face to face." There was another pause, and then a door was closed rather sharply on the first floor, and a step were heard upon the stair. "That's the doctor," cried the landlord. "Look sharp and you can catch him." It was but 2 steps from the small parlour to the door of the old George Inn. The wide oak staircase landed almost in the street. There was room for a turkey rug, and nothing more between the threshold and the last round of the descent. But this little space was every evening brilliantly lit up, not only by the light upon the stair, and the great signal lamp below the psalm, but by the warm radiance of the bar-room window. The George thus brightly advertised itself to passers by in the cold streets. Betts walked steadily to the spot, and we, who were hanging behind him, beheld the 2 men meet, as one of them had phrased it, face to face. Dr. McFarlane were alert and vigorous. His white hair set off his pale and placid, although energetic countenance. He was richly dressed in the finest broadcloth and the whitest linen, with a great gold watch chain and studs and spectacles of the same precious material. He wore a broad folded tie, white and speckled with lilac, and he carried on his arm a comfortable driving coat of fur. There were no doubts but he became his years, breathing as he did of wealth and consideration. It was a surprising contrast to see our parlour sop, old, dirty, pimpled and robed in his old camlet cloak, confronting him at the bottom of the stairs. "McFarlane," he said somewhat loudly, more like an herald than a friend. The great doctor pulled up short on the 4th step, as though the familiarity of the dress surprised him, and somewhat shocked his dignity. "Toddy McFarlane," repeated Betts. The London man almost staggered. He stared for the swift of a second at the man before him, glanced behind him with a sort of scare, and then he started in a startled whisper. "Betts," he said, "you?" "Aye," said the other man, "me. Did you think I were dead too? You're not so easy shot, are our acquaintance." "Hush, hush," exclaimed the doctor. "Hush, hush. This meeting is so unexpected. I can see you're unmoved. unmanned. I hardly knew you, I confess at first, but I'm overjoyed to have this opportunity. But presently must be how'd you do and have a goodbye for once in one, for my fly is waiting, and I must not fail the train. But you shall, let me see. Yes, you shall give me your address, and you can count on early news of me. We must do something for your effects. I fear you are out of our elbows, but we must see that. For old lang syne, as once we sang at suppers. Money, Redfettes, money from you. The money I had of you is lying where I cast it in the rain. Dr. McFarlane had talked himself into some measure of superiority and confidence, but the uncommon energy of this refusal cast him back in his first confusion. An horrible, ugly look came and went across his almost venerable countenance. My dear fellow, he said, be as you please. My last thought is to offend you. I will intrude on none. I will leave you my address, however. I do not wish it. I do not wish to know the roof that shelters you, interrupted the other. I heard your name. I feared it might be you. I wish to know if after all there were a God. I know there is none. Begone. He still stood in the middle of the rug, between the stairs and doorway. The great London physician, in order to escape, would be forced to step upon one side. He would plainly hesitate before the thought of this humiliation. Light as he was, there were a dangerous glitter in his spectacles, but while he still paused uncertain, he became aware that the driver of his fly was peering in from the street at this unusual scene, and caught a glimpse at the same time of our little body from the parlour, huddled by the corner of the bar. The presence of so many witnesses decided him at once to flee. We crouched together, brushing on the wainscot, and made a dart, like a serpent striking for the door. This tribulation was not entirely at an end, for even as we were passing, Fates clutched her by the arm. And these words came in a whisper, yet painfully distinct. Have you seen it again? The great, rich London doctor cried out aloud with a sharp, throttling cry. He dashed his questioner across the open space, and, with his hands over his head, fled out the door like a detected thief. Before it had occurred to one of us to make a movement, the fly were already rattling towards the station. The scene were over like a dream, and the dream had left proof and traces of its passage. Next day the servant found the fine gold spectacles crushed and broken on the threshold, and that very night, we not all standing breathless by the barroom window, and Fetz at our side, sober, pale, and resolute, and look. God protect us, Mr. Fates, said the landlord, coming first into possession of his customary sense. What in the universe is all this? These are strange things, you could say. Better stand towards us. He looked us each in succession in the face. See if you can hold your tongues, he said. That man, McFarlane, is not safe to cross. Those that have done so already have repented it too late. And then, without so much as finishing his third glass, far less waiting for his other two, he bade us goodbye and went forth under the lamp of the hotel into the black night. We three returned to our places in the parlour, with the big red fire and 4 clear candles. As we recapitulated what had passed, the first chill of our surprise soon changed into a glow of curiosity. We sat late, and with the latest session I have known in the old George, each man before we parted had his theory that he were bound to prove, and none of us had any nearer business in this world than to track out the past of our contemned? I think contemned, I'm not familiar with that word. Our contemned companion, and surprised the secret that he shared with the great London doctor. It is no great boast, but I believe I will better hand at worming out a story than either of my fellows at the George, and perhaps there is now no other man alive who can narrate to you all the following foul and unnatural events. Yeah, struck me a bit with this one, but it is more compelling. In his young days, Fetz studied medicine at the School of Edinburgh. He had talent of a kind, a talent that picks up swiftly what it is and readily retails it for its own. He worked little at home, but he was civil, attentive, and intelligent in the presence of his masters. They soon picked him out as a lad who listened closely and remembered well. Nay, strange as it seems to me when I first heard it, he was in those days well favoured and pleased by his exterior. There was, at this period, a certain extramural teacher of anatomy who I shall here designate by the letter K. His name was subsequently too well known. A man who bore its skulk through the streets of Edinburgh in disguise, while the mob that applauded at the execution of Burke called loudly for the blood of his employer. Mr. K was then at the top of his vote. He enjoyed a popularity, due partly to his own talent and address, partly to the incapacity of his rival, the university professor. The students at least swore by his name. Fetz believed himself, and was believed by others to have laid the foundations of success when he had acquired the favour of this meteorically famous man. Mr. K was a bon vivant as well as an accomplished teacher. He liked a sly allusion no less than a careful preparation. In both capacities, Fetz enjoyed and deserved his notice. By the second year of his attendance, he he held a half irregular position of second demonstrator or sub-assistant in the class. In this capacity, the charge of the theatre and lecture room devolved in particular upon his shoulders. He had to answer for the cleanliness of the premise, the conduct of the other students, and it was part of his duty to supply, receive, and divide the various subjects. It was with a view to this last, at the time very delicate affair, that he was lodged by Mr. K in the same wind, and at last in the same building with the dissecting rooms. Here, after a night of turbulent pleasures, his hands still tottering, his sight misty and confused, he would be called out of bed in the black house before the winter dawn by the unclean and desperate interlopers who supplied the table. He would open the door to these men, since infamous throughout the land. He would help them with their tragic burden, pay them with sordid price, and remain alone when they were gone with the unfriendly relics of humanity. From such a scene he would return to snatch another hour or two of slumber, to repair the abuses of the night and refresh himself for the labours of the day. Few lads could have been more insensible to the impressions of a life thus passed among the ensigns of mortality. His mind was closed against all general considerations. He was incapable of interest in the fate and fortunes of another, a slave of his own desires and low ambitions. Cold, light, and selfish in the last resort, he had that modicum of prudence, miscalled morality, which kept a man from inconvenient drunkenness or punishable theft. He coveted besides a measure of consideration from his master and his fellow pupils, and he had no desire to fail conspicuously in the external parts of life. Thus he made it his pleasure to gain some distinction in his studies, and day after day rendered unimpeachable our service to his employer, Mr. K. For his day of work, he indemnified himself by nights of roaring blackguard enjoyment, and when that balance had been struck, the organ that he called his conscience declared itself content. The supply of subjects were a continual trouble to him as well as to his master. In that large and busy class, the raw material of the anatomist kept perpetually running out, and the business thus rendered necessary were not only unpleasant in itself, but threatened dangerous consequences to all who were concerned. It was the policy of Mr. K, who asked no questions in his dealing with the trade. They bring the body and we pay the price, he used to say, dwelling on the alliteration quid pro quo. And again, somewhat profanely, asked no questions, he would tell his assistants, for conscience' sake. There was no understanding that the subjects were provided by the crime of murder. Had the idea been broached to him in words, he would have recoiled in horror, but the lightness of his speech upon so grave a matter was in itself an offence against good manners, and a temptation to the men with whom he dealt. Betts, for instance, had often remarked to himself upon the singular freshness of the bodies. He had been struck again and again by the hang-dog, abominable looks of the ruffians who came to him before the dawn, and putting things together clearly in his private thoughts, he perhaps attributed a meaning too immoral and too categorical to the unguarded counsels of his master. He understood his duty, in short, to have three branches. The table was brought, to pay the price, and to avert the eye from any evidence of crime. One November morning this policy of silence was put sharply to the test. He had been awake all night with racking toothache, pacing his room like a caged beast, or throwing himself with fury on his bed, and fallen at last into that profound, uneasy slumber that so follows on a night of pain, when he was awakened by the third or fourth angry repetition of the concerted signal. Or a thin, bright moonshine, it was bitter cold, windy, and frosty. The town had not yet awakened. An indefinable stir already preluded the noise and business of the day. The ghouls had come later than usual, and they seemed more than usually eager to be gone. Betts, sick with sleep, lighted them upstairs. He heard their grumbling Irish voices through a dream as they stripped the sack from their sad merchandise. He leaned, dozing, with his shoulder propped against the wall. He had to shake himself to find the men their money. As he did so, his eyes lighted on the dead face. He started. He took 2 steps nearer, with the candle raised. "God Almighty!" he cried. "Is that Jane Galbraith?" The men answered nothing. They shuffled nearer towards the door. "I know her, I tell you," he continued. "She was alive and hearty yesterday. It's impossible she can be dead. It's impossible you should have got this body fairly." "Sure, sir, you're mistaken entirely," said one of the men. The other looked Fetz darkly in the eyes and demanded his money on the spot. It were impossible to misconceive the threat or to exaggerate the danger. The lad's art failed him. He stammered some excuse, counted the sum, and saw his hateful visitors depart. No sooner were they gone than he hastened to confirm his doubts. By a dozen unquestionable marks he identified the girl he had jested with the day before. He saw with horror marks upon her body that might well betook violence. A panic seized him, and he took refuge in his room. There he reflected at length over the discovery that he had made, considered soberly the bearing of Mr. K's instructions, and the danger to himself in interference in so serious a business, and at last, in sort of perplexity, determined to wait for the advice of his immediate superior, the class assistant. This was a young doctor, Wolfe Macfarlane, a high favourite among all the reckless students, clever, dissipated and unscrupulous to the last degree. He had travelled and studied abroad. His manners were agreeable and a little forward. He was an authority upon the stage, skilful on the ice or the links with skate or golf club. He dressed with nice audacity, and, to put the finishing touch upon his glory, he kept a gig and strong trotting horse. With Fetts he were on terms of intimacy. Indeed, their relative positions called for some community of life, and when subjects were scarce, the pair would drive far into the country in McFadden's gig, visit and desecrate some lonely graveyard, and return before dawn with the body at the door of the dissecting room. On that particular morning, Macfarlane arrived somewhat earlier than his wont. Fetts heard him and met him on the stairs, and told him his story, and showed him the cause of his alarm. Macfarlane examined the ecchymosis. "Yes," he said with an eye, "it looks fishy." "Well, what should I do?" asked Fetts. "Do?" repeated the other. "Do you want to do anything?" "Least said, soonest mended, I should say." "Someone else might recognise her," objected Fetts. "She was as well known as the Castle Rock." "Well, we'll hope not," said Macfarlane. "And if anybody does, well, you didn't. You didn't see, and there's no end. There's an end. The fact is, this has been going on too long. Stir up the mud and you'll get Kay into the most unholy trouble. You'll be in a shocking box yourself, so will I, if you come to that. I should like to know how any one of us would look, what the devil we should have to say for ourselves in any Christian witness box. For me, you know, that's one thing certain, that practically speaking, all our subjects have been murdered." "Macfarlane," cried Fetts. "Come now," said the other, "as if you hadn't suspected it yourself. Suspecting is one thing, and proof another. Yes, I know. I'm sorry, as you are, this should have come here," tapping the body with his cane. "The next best thing for me is not to recognise it," he added coolly. "I don't. You may, if you please. I don't dictate, but I think a man of the world would do as I do. And if I had, I fancy this is what Kay would look for at our hands. The question is, why did he choose us to do for his assistance? And they answer, because he didn't want all wives. This was the tone of all others to affect the mind of a lad like Fetts. He agreed to imitate Macfarlane. The body of the unfortunate girl was duly dissected, and no one remarked or appeared to recognise her. One afternoon, when his day's work were over, Fetts dropped into a popular tavern and found Macfarlane sitting with a stranger. This was a small man, very pale and dark, with coal-black eyes. The cut of his features gave a promise of intellect and refinement, which was but feebly realised in his manners, for he proved, upon a near acquaintance, coarse, vulgar, and stupid. He exercised, however, a very remarkable control over Macfarlane. Issued orders like the Shah, became inflamed at the least discussion or delay, and commented rudely on the servility with which he were obeying. This most offensive person took a fancy to Fetts on the spot, plied him with drinks, and honoured him with unusual confidences of his past career. If a tenth part of what he confessed were true, he were a very loathsome rogue, and the lad's vanity were tickled by the attention of so experienced a man. "I am a pretty bad fellow myself," the stranger remarked. "Macfarlane is the boy. Toddy Macfarlane, I call him. Toddy, order your friend another glass." Or it might be, "Toddy, you jump up and shut the door." "Toddy hates me," he said again. "Oh, yes, Toddy, you do." "Don't you call me that confounded name," growled Macfarlane. "Hear him. You ever see the lads play knife? You would like to do that all over my body," remarked the stranger. "We medicals have a better way than that," said Fetts. "When we dislike a dear friend of ours, we dissect him." Macfarlane looked up sharply, as though this jest was scarcely to his mind. The afternoon passed. Gray, for that was the stranger's name, invited Fetts to join them at dinner, ordered a feast so sumptuous that the tavern was thrown into commotion. When all were done, commanded Macfarlane to settle the bill. It was late before they separated. The man and Gray were incapably drunk. Macfarlane, sobered by his fury, chewed the end of the money he had been forced to squander, and the slights he had been obliged to swallow. Fetts, with various liquors singing in his head, returned home with devious footsteps, and a mind entirely in abeyance. Next day, Macfarlane was absent from the class, and Fetts smiled to himself as he imagined him still squiring the intolerable Gray from tavern to tavern. As soon as the hour of liberty had struck, he posted from place to place in quest of his last night's companions. He could find them, however, nowhere. Returned early to his rooms, went early to bed, and slept the sleep of the just. At 4 in the morning, he was wakened by the well-known signal. As entering the door, he was filled with astonishment to find Macfarlane with his gig, and in the gig one of those long and ghastly packages with which he was so well acquainted. "What?" he cried. "Have you been out alone? How'd you manage?" Macfarlane silenced him roughly, bidding him return to business. When they had got the body upstairs and laid it on the table, Macfarlane made at first as if he were going away. Then he paused and seemed to hesitate, and then, "You'd better look at the face," he said, tones of some constraint. "You had better," he repeated, as Fetz only stared at him in wonder. "But where and how did you come by it?" cried the other. "Look at the face," was the only answer. Fetz was staggered. Strange doubts assailed him. He looked from the young doctor to the body and then back again. At last, with a start, he did as he was bidden. He had almost expected the sight which met his eyes, and yet the shock was cruel. To see, fixed in the rigidity of death, and naked on that coarse layer of sackcloth, the man who he had left well clad, and full of meat and sin upon the threshold of a tavern, awoke, even in thoughtless Fetz, some of the terrors of the conscious. It was a crass tibi, which re-echoed in his soul, the two whom he had known should have come to lie upon these icy tables. Yet these were only secondary thoughts. His first concern regarded Wolf. Unprepared for a challenge so momentous, he knew not how to look his comrade in the face. He durst not meet his eye, and he had neither words nor voice at his command. It was MacFarlane himself who made the first advance. He came up quickly behind and laid his hand gently but firmly on the other's shoulders. "Richardson," he said. "Richardson," said he, "may have the head." Now Richardson were a student who had long been anxious for that portion of the human subject to dissect. There were no answer, and the murderer resumed. "Talking of business, you must pay me. Your accounts, you see, must tally." Fetz found the voice, the ghost of his own. "Pay you," he cried. "Pay you for that." "Why, yes, of course you must. By all means, and on every possible account you must," returned the other. "I dare not give it for nothing. You dare not take it for nothing. It would compromise us both. This is another case like Jane Galbraith's. The more things are wrong, the more we must act as if all were right. Where does old Kay keep his money?" "There," answered Fetz, hoarsely pointing to the cupboard in the corner. "Give me the keys, then," said the other calmly, holding out his hand. There was an instant's hesitation. The die was cast. MacFarlane could not suppress a nervous twitch, the infinitesimal mark of an immense relief, as he felt the key between his fingers. He opened the cupboard, brought out pen and ink and paper, and a paper book that stood in one compartment, and separated from the funds in a drawer a sum suitable to the occasion. "Now look here," he said. "There the payment is made. First proof of your good faith, first step to your security. You have now to clinch it by a second. Enter the payment in your book, and then you for your part may defy the devil." Next few seconds were for Fetz an agony of thought, and balanced in his terrors, it was the most immediate triumph. Any future difficulty seemed almost welcome, if he could avoid a present quarrel with MacFarlane. He set down the candle, which he had been carrying all this time, and with a steady hand entered the date, the nature, and the amount of the transaction. "And now," said MacFarlane, "it's only fair that you should pocket the lucre. I've had my share already. By the by, when a man of the world falls into a bit of luck, he has a few extra shillings in his pocket. I'm ashamed to speak of it, but there's a rule of conduct in the case. No treating, no purchase of expensive class books, no squaring of old debts. Borrow, don't lend." "MacFarlane," began Fetz, somewhat hoarsely, "I've put my neck in a halter to oblige you." "To oblige me?" cried Wolf. "Oh, come. You did, as near as I could see the matter, what you downright had to in self-defence. Suppose I got into trouble, where would you be? This second little matter flows clearly from the first. Mr. Grey is the continuation of Miss Galbraith. You can't begin and then stop. If you begin, you must keep beginning. Keep on beginning, that's the truth. No rest for the wicked." An horrible sense of blackness from the treachery of fate seized hold upon the soul of the unhappy student. "My God," he cried, "but what have I done? When did I begin? Be made class assistant, in the name of reason. Where's the harm in that? Service wanted the position. Service might have got it. Would he have been where I am now?" "My dear fellow," said MacFarlane, "what a boy you are. What harm has come to you? What harm can come to you if you hold your tongue? My man, do you know what life this is? There are two squads of us, the lions and the lambs. If you're a lamb, you'll come to lie upon these tables like Grey or Jane Galbraith. If you're a lion, you'll live and drive a horse like me, like Kay, like all the world with any wit and courage. You're staggered at the first, but look at Kay. My dear fellow, you're clever, you have pluck. I like you and Kay likes you. You were born to lead the hunt, and I tell you on my honour and my experience of life, 3 days from now you'll laugh at all these scarecrows like a high school boy at a farce." And with that, MacFarlane took his departure and drove off up the wind in his gig to get under the cover before daylight. Fetz was thus left alone with his regrets. He saw the miserable peril in which he stood involved. He saw with inescapable dismay that there were no limit to his weakness, and that from concession to concession he had fallen from the arbiter of MacFarlane's destiny, who was paid and helped as accomplice. He would have given the world to have been a little braver at the time, but it did not occur to him that he might still be brave. The secret of Jane Galbraith from the cursed entry in the daybook closed his mouth. Hours passed. The class began to arrive. The members of the unhappy Grey were dealt out to one another and received without remark. Richardson were made happy with the end. And before the hour of freedom rang, Fetch trembled with exhaustion to perceive how far they had already gone towards safety. For 2 days he continued to watch, with increasing joy, the dreadful process of disguise. On the 3rd day, McFarlane made his appearance. He had been ill, he said, but he made up for the lost time with the energy with which he directed the students. To Richardson in particular, he extended the most valuable assistance and advice, and that student, encouraged by the praise of the demonstrator, burned eye with ambitious hopes and saw the medal already in his grasp. Before the week were out, McFarlane's prophecy had been fulfilled. Betts had outlived his terrors and forgotten his abasement. He began to plume himself up on his courage, and had so arranged the story in his mind that he could look back on these events with an unhealthy pride. Of his accomplice he saw but little. They met, of course, in the business of the class. They received their orders together from Mr. K. At times they had a word or two in private. McFarlane was from first to last particularly kind and jovial, but it was plain that he avoided any reference to their common secret, and even when Betts whispered to him that he had cast his lot in with the lions and forswore the lambs, he only signalled to him smiling and rolled his peace. At length, an occasion arose which threw the pair once more into a closer union. Mr. K. was again short of subjects. Pupils were eager, and were part of this teacher's pretension to be always well supplied. At the same time there came the news of a burial in the rustic graveyard of Glencorse. Time has little changed the place in question. It stood, then as now, upon a crossroad, outcalled a human habitation, and buried fathom deep in the foliage of 6 cedar trees. The cries of the sheep upon the neighbouring hills, the streamlet upon either hand, one loudly singing among pebbles, the other dripping furtively from pond to pond, the stir of the wind in mountainous old flowering chestnuts, and, once in 7 days, the voice of the bell and the old tunes of the precentor were the only sound that disturbed the silence round the rural church. The Resurrection Man, used a byname of the period, was not to be deterred by any of these sanctities of customary pipe. It was part of his trade to despise and desecrate the scrolls and trumpets of the old tombs, the paths worn by the feet of worshippers and mourners, and the offerings and inscriptions of bereaved affliction. To rustic neighbourhoods, where love is more than commonly tenacious, and where some bonds of blood or fellowship unite the entire society of a parish, the Body Snatcher, far from being repelled by natural respect, was attracted by the ease and safety of his task. The bodies that had been laid in the earth in joyful expectation of a far different awakening, there came the hasty, lamp-lit, terror-hunted resurrection of the spade and matter. This coffin was forced, the cement torn, and the melancholy relics, clad in sackcloth after being rattled for hours on moonless byways, were at length exposed to utmost indignities before a class of gaping boys. Somewhat as 2 vultures may swoop upon a dying lamb, Betts and McFarlane were let loose upon a grave in that green and quiet resting place. Wife of a farmer, a woman who had lived for 60 years and been known for nothing but good butter and a godly conversation, was to be rooted from her grave at midnight, carried, dead and naked, to that faraway city that she had always honoured with her Sunday's best. The place beside her family was to be empty to the crack of doom, her innocent and almost venerable members to be exposed to that last curiosity of the anatomist. Late one afternoon the pair set forth, wrapped in cloaks and furnished with a formidable bottle. It rained without remission, a cold, dense, lashing rain. Now and again there blew a puff of wind, but these sheets of falling water kept it down. Bottle and all, it was a sad and silent drive as far as Pennyquick, where they were to spend the evening. They stopped once to hide their implements in a thick bush not far from the churchyard. Once again at the Fisher's Tryst to have a toast before the kitchen fire, and vary their nips of whisky with a glass of ale. When they reached their journey's end, the gig was ours. The horse were fed and comforted, and the 2 young doctors in private rooms sat down for the best dinner and the best wine the house afforded. The lights, the fire, the beating rain upon the windows, the cold incongruous work that lay before them had adjusted their enjoyment of the meal. With every glass their cordiality increased. Soon McFarlane handed a little pile of gold to his companion. "A compliment," he said. "Between friends, these little accommodations ought to fly like pipelines." Betts pocketed the money and applauded the sentiment to the echo. "You are a philosopher," he cried. "I was an ass-tail till I knew you. You and Kay, between you by the Lord Harry, but you'll make a man of me." "Of course we shall," applauded McFarlane. "A man? I'll tell you, I required a man to back me up the other morning. There are some big, brawling 40-year-old cowards who would have turned sick at the look of the thing. But not you. You kept your head. I watched you." Well, and why not? That's then warned himself. It were no affair of mine. There was nothing to gain on the one side but disturbance, and on the other I could count on your gratitude, don't you see? And he slapped his pocket till the gold pieces rang. McFarlane somehow felt a certain touch of alarm at these unpleasant words. He may have regretted that he had taught this young companion so successfully. He had no time to interfere, for the other noisily continued in this boastful strain. The great thing is not to be afraid. Now, between you and me, I don't want to hang, that's practical. For all account, McFarlane, I was born with a contempt. Hell, God, devil, right and wrong, sin, crime, and all this old gallery of curiosities. May frighten boys, but men of the world like you and me despise them. Here's to the memory of Grey. It was by this time growing somewhat late. The gig, according to order, were brought round to the door with both lamps brightly shining, and the young men had to pay their bill and take the road. They announced that they were bound for Peebles, drove in that direction till they were clear from the last of the houses of the town, and extinguishing their lamps, returned upon their course, and followed a by-road towards Glencorse. There were no sound but that of their own passage, and the incandescent strident pouring of the rain. It was pitch dark. Here and there a white gate or white stone in the wall guided them for a short space across the night, but for the most part they were at foot space, and almost groping they picked their way through that resonant blackness to their solemn and isolated destination. In the sunken roads that traversed the neighbourhood of the burying ground, the last glimmer failed them, and it became necessary to kindle a match and re-illume one of the lanterns of the gig. Thus, under the dripping trees and environed by huge and moving shadows, they reached the scene of their unhallowed labours. They were both experienced in such affairs, and powerful with the spade, and they had scarce been 20 minutes at their task before they were rewarded by a dull rattle on the coffin lid. At the same moment, McFarlane, having hurt his hand upon a stone, flung it carelessly above his head. The grave, in which they now stood, almost to the shoulders, was close to the edge of the plateau of the graveyard, and the gig lamp had been propped up. The better to illuminate their labours against the tree, and on at the immediate verge of the steep bank descending the stream. Chance had taken sure aim with that stone, and came a clang of broken glass. Night fell upon them. Sound alternately dull and ringing announced the bound the lantern down the bank, and its occasional collision with the trees, a stone or two, which should have dislodged its descent, rattled behind it into the profundities of the glen, and then silence, like night, resumed its sway. And they might bend their ear into its utmost pitch, but naught was to be heard except the rain, now marching to the wind, now steadily falling over miles of open country. They were so nearly at an end of their abhorred task that they judged it wiser to complete it in the dark. The coffin were exhumed and broken open, the body inserted in the dripping sack and carried between them to the gig, one mounted to keep it in place, and the other, taking the horse by the mouth, groped along the wall and brush till they reached the wider road by the Fisher's Tryst. Here was a faint, diffused agency which they hailed like daylight. By that they pushed the horses to a good pace and began to rattle almost merrily in the direction of the town. They had both been wet to the skin during their operations, and now, as the gig jumped among the deep ruts, the thing that stood propped up between them fell now upon one and now upon the other. Every repetition of the horrid contact, each instinctively repelled it with the greater haste, and the process, natural though it was, began to tell upon the nerves of the companions. McFarlane made some ill-favoured jest about the farmer's wife, but it came hollowly from his lips, and was allowed to drop in silence. Still, their unnatural burden bumped from side to side, and now the head would be laid, as in conference, upon the shoulders, and now the drenching sackcloth would flap icily about their faces. A creeping chill began to possess the soul of Fetz. He peered at the bundle, and it seemed somehow larger than at first. All over the countryside, from every degree of distance, the farm dogs accompanied their passage with tragic ululations, and it grew and grew upon his mind that some unnatural miracle had been accomplished, that some nameless change had befallen the dead body, and that it was in fear of their unholy burden that the dogs were howling. "For God's sake," said he, making a great effort to arrive at speech, "for God's sake, let's have a light." Seemingly, McFarlane was affected in the same direction. Though he made no reply, he stopped the horses, passed the reins to his companion, got down and proceeded to kindle the remaining lamps. They had, by that time, got no farther than the crossroad down the Orchard Glenny. The rain still poured as though the deluge were returning, and it were no easy matter to make a light in such a world of wet and darkness. When at last the flickering blue flame had been transferred to the wick, began to expand and clarify and shed a wide circle of misty brightness around the gig, it became possible for the two young men to see each other, and the thing they had along with them. The rain had moulded that rough sack in the outlines of the body underneath. The head was distinct from the trunk, the shoulders plainly modelled, Something once spectral and human riveted their eyes upon the ghastly comrade of their drive. For some time McFarlane stood motionless, holding up the hand. A nameless dread was swayed like a wet sheet about the body, tightened the white skin upon the face of Fetz. A fear that was meaningless, a horror of what could not be, kept mounting in his brain. Another beat of the watch, and he had spoken. His comrade forestalled him. "That is not a woman," said McFarlane in a hushed voice. "Were a woman when you put her in," whispered Fetz. "Hold the lamp," said the other. "I must see her face." As Fetz took the lamp, his companion untied the fastenings of the sack and drew down the cover from the end. The light fell very clear upon the dark, well-moulded features and smooth-shaven cheeks of a too familiar countenance, often beheld in dreams by both of these young men. A wild yell rang up in the night. Each leaped from his own side into the roadway. The lamp fell, broke, and was extinguished, and the horse, terrified by this unusual commotion, bounced and went off towards Edinburgh at the gallop, bearing along with it, sole occupant of the gig, the body of the long dead and long dissected Grey. Huh. And that's the end of the story. That's a little creepy. I don't think I ever really thought much about medicine and the need for bodies in it. That's a very grim story indeed. I suppose there's something to be understood in that. The way in which a person can become, how would you say, desensitized, I suppose, to the, I guess humanity, the significance of other people when you spend so much time among the dead. It's a grim thought. I mean, this does seem to be sort of a morality tale. We see Fetz decline in his actions, his morality, but we also see, well, I don't know what we see really. I suppose the world encouraging him to do it. This unnamed Professor K, figure, and the older mentor figure McFarlane who set him up to do it. Interestingly, it seems that of them, Fetz is the one who comes to the worst end and who takes it the worst. He runs away from his position at this school, it seems, goes out into the little country town in the Georgian and lives his life as a sad drunk. While McFarlane, who was also there along with him and, well, I was going to say as good, more guilty of crimes, he killed a man. He stuck by it, stayed in his position at school, became a doctor, and by all accounts were very successful. And even get rich, a London doctor, looked younger than Fetz. It's an odd sort of morality tale. I mean, it ends with the sort of reveal that Grey was the body that they had, or when that Grey had become the body they put in the gig. But yeah. Not sure what to think of that one. Well, I know one thing I do think of it. I think names in Scotland are very hard to pronounce. Like that. Still, I quite liked it. I don't think I've got much else to say, so another quick drink of water, then a moment to reflect. Anyone joined us? Anyone here watching? Got any thoughts on that? No? No, okay. Well, worth a try, I suppose. Shall we go look at the others then? So yeah, we've got 4 of them. We've read The Build of Fire and Love of Life, and the 2 others that are above us. But the ones we got here that are as yet unread are Brown Wolf, All Gold Canyon, The House of Pride, and Batard. And I spoke that Batard was the first one I brought back, as you can see by its place, but I guess probably I'm going to have to read them the other way around, because Brown Wolf's the one at the outside, and I mean, I guess I could shuffle them around and get Batard first, but it seemed a lot of work. But unless there's someone hanging around who particularly wants one of these to be read first, I'll just start with Brown Wolf. It don't seem like there are, so... There we are. What's that called? There we go. There we are. Brown Wolf. She had delayed because of the dew-wet grass in order to put on her overshoes. When she emerged from the house, found her waiting husband absorbed in the wonders of a bursting almond bud. She sent a questioning glance across the tall grass, in and out among the orchard trees. "Where's Wolf?" she asked. "We were here a moment ago." While Irvin drew himself away with a jerk from the metaphysics and poetry of the organic miracle of blossom and surveyed the landscape. "He was running the road the last I saw out of him." "Wolf! Wolf! Here, Wolf!" she called as they left the clearing and took the trail that led down through the wax belt of Manzanita jungle to the country road. Irvine thrust between the lips of the little finger of each hand and lent to her efforts a shrill whistling. She covered her ear hastily and made a regrets. "Ma, for a poet, delicately attuned and all the rest of it, you can make an unlovely noise. My eardrums are pierced. You out-whistle. Orpheus. I was about to say a street Arab," she concluded severely. "Poesy does not prevent one from being practical, at least it doesn't prevent me. Mine is no futility of genius that can't sell gems to the magazine." He assumed a mock extravagance and went on, "I am no attic singer, no ballroom warbler, and why? Because I am practical. Mine is no squalor of song that cannot transmute itself with proper exchange of value into a flower-crowned cottage, a sweet mountain meadow, a grove of redwoods, an orchard of 37 trees, one long row of blackberries, and 2 short rows of strawberries, to say nothing of a quarter of a mile of gurgling brook. I am a beauty merchant, a trader in song, and I pursue utility, dear match. I sing a song, thanks to the magazine editors. I transmute my song into a waft of the west wind, sighing through the redwoods, into mute murmurs of waters over mossy stones, and sing back to me another song than the one I sang, and yet the same song wonderfully transmuted. Oh, that all your song transmutations were as successful," she laughed. "Name one that wasn't. Those 2 beautiful sonnets that you transmuted into the cow that was accounted the worst milker in the township. She was beautiful, even. That she didn't give milk," Matt interrupted. "But she was beautiful, now wasn't she?" he insisted. "And here's where beauty and utility fall out," was her reply. "And there's the wolf." From the thicket-covered hillside came a crashing of underbrush, and then, 40 feet above them, on the edge of the sheer wall of rock, appeared a wolf's head, shoulders. His braced forepaws dislodged a pebble, and with sharp-pricked ears and peering eyes he watched the fall of the pebble till it struck their feet. Then he transferred his gaze, and with open mouth laughed down at them. "You wolf, you, and blessed wolf," the man and woman called out to him. Ears flattened back and... Wait, blessed wolf, is this White Fang? The ears flattened back down at the sound, and the head seemed to snuggle under the caress of an invisible hand. They watched him scramble backward into the thicket, and proceeded out on their way. Several minutes later, rounding the turn of the trail, where the descent was less precipitous, he joined them in the midst of a miniature avalanche of pebbles and loose soil. He was not demonstrative. A pat and a rub around the ears from the man, and a more prolonged caressing from the woman, and he were away down the trail in front of them, gliding effortlessly over the ground in a true wolf fashion. In build and coat and brush, he were a huge timber wolf. The alarm given to his wolfhood by his colour and marking. There the dog unmistakably advertised itself. No wolf were ever coloured like him. He were brown, deep brown, red brown, an orgy of brown. The back and shoulders were a warm brown that paled on the sides and underneath, to a yellow that was dingy because of the brown that lingered in it. The white of the throat and paws and the spots of the eyes were dirty because of the persistent and ineradicable brown, while the eyes themselves were twin topazes, golden brown. The man and woman loved the dog very much. Perhaps this was because it had been such a task to win his love. It had been no easy matter when he first drifted in mysteriously out of nowhere to their little mountain cottage. Footsore and famished, he had killed a rabbit under their very nose and under their very windows, and then crawled away and slept by the spring at the foot of the blackberry bushes. When Walt Irvine went down to inspect the intruder, he was snarled at for his pains, and Madge likewise was snarled at when she went down to present, as peace offering, a large pan of bread and milk. The most unsociable dog he proved to be, resenting all their advances, refusing to let them lay hands on him, menacing them with bared fangs and bristling hair. Nevertheless, he remained sleeping and resting by the spring, and eating the food they gave him, after they set it down at a safe distance and retreated. His wretched physical condition explained why he lingered, and when he had recuperated after several days' sojourn, he disappeared. And this would have been the end of him, as far as Irvine and his wife were concerned, had not Irvine, at that particular time, been called away into the northern part of the state. Running along the train near the line between California and Oregon, he chanced to look out the window and saw his unsocial guests sliding along the wagon road, brown and wolfish, tired yet tireless, dust-covered and soiled with 200 miles of road. The Irvine were a man of impulse, a poet. He got off the train at the next station, bought a piece of meat at a butcher shop, and captured the vagrant on the outskirts of the town. The return trip was made in the baggage car, and so Wolf came a second time at the mountain cottage. Here he was tied up for a week and made love to by the man and woman, but were very circumspect to love-making. Remote and alien as a traveller from another planet, he snarled down their soft-spoken love words. He never barked, and all the time they had him, he was never known to bark. With him became a problem. Irvine liked problem. He had a metal plate made, on which he stamped, "Return to Walt Irvine, Glen Ellen, Sumner County, California." This was riveted to a collar and strapped about the dog's neck. Then he would turn loose, and promptly he disappeared. A day later came a telegram from Mendocino County. In 20 hours he had made over 100 miles to the north, and was still going when captured. He came back by Wells Fargo Express, was tied up 3 days, and was loosed on the 4th day and lost. This time he gained southern Oregon before he was caught and returned. Always, as soon as he received his liberty, he fled away, and always he fled north. He was possessed of an obsession that drove him north. The omen instinct, Irvine called it, after he expended the selling price of the sonnet in getting the animal back from northern Oregon. Another time, the brown wanderer succeeded in traversing half the length of California, all of Oregon, and most of Washington before he was picked up and returned to collect. A remarkable thing was the speed with which he travelled. Fed up and rested, as soon as he was loosed, he devoted all his energy to getting over the ground. On the first day's run, he was known to cover as high as 150 miles, and after that he would average 100 miles a day until caught. He always arrived back lean and hungry and savage, and always departed fresh and vigorous, cleaving his way northward in response to some prompting of his being that no one can understand. But at last, after a few hour year of flight, he accepted the inevitable and elected to remain at the cottage where first he had killed the rabbit and slept by the spring. Even after that, a long time elapsed before the man and woman succeeded in patting him. It were a great victory. They alone were allowed to put hands on him. They were fastidiously exclusive, and no guest at the cottage ever succeeded in making up to him. A low growl greeted such approach. If anyone had the hardihood to come nearer, the lips lifted, naked fangs appeared, and the growl became a snarl. A snarl so terrible and malignant that it awed the stoutest of them. As a light white wolves, the farmers' dogs knew ordinary dog snarling, but had never seen a wolf snarling before. He was without antecedents. His history began with Walt and Madge. He had come up from the south, but never a clue did they get of the owner from whom he had evidently fled. Miss Johnson, their nearest neighbour and the one who supplied them with milk, proclaimed him a Klondike dog. Her brother would burrow in for frozen pastries in that far country, and so she constructed herself an authority on the subject. She constituted herself an authority on the subject. But they did not dispute her. There were the tips of the wolf's ears, obviously so severely frozen at some point in time that they would never quite heal again. Besides, he looked like the photographs of the Alaskan dogs they saw published in magazines and newspapers. They often speculated over his past and tried to conjure up, from what they had read and heard, what his northern life had been. And the northland still drew him, they knew, for at night they sometimes heard him crying softly. When the north wind blew and the bite of frost were in the air, a great restlessness would come upon him, and he would lift the mournful lament which they knew to be the long wolf howl. Yet he never barked. No provocation was great enough to draw from him that canine cry. Long discussions they had, during which time were winning him as to whose dog he was. Each claimed him, and each proclaimed loudly any expression of affection made by him. But the man had the better of it first, chiefly because he was a man. It was patent that Wolf had no experience with women. He did not understand women. Madge's skirts were something he never quite accepted. The swish of them were enough to set him abristle with suspicion. On a windy day she could not approach him at all. On the other hand, it was Madge who fed him. Also it was she who ruled the kitchen, and it was by her favour, and her favour alone, that he was permitted to come within the sacred precinct. It was because of these things that she bade fair to overcome the handicap of her garments. Then it was that Walt put forth special effort, making it a practice to have Wolf lie at his feet while he wrote, and between petting and talking, losing much time from his work. Walt won in the end, and his victory were most probably due to the fact that he were a man. The Madge averred that they would have At another quarter of a mile, a gurgling brook and at least 2 west winds sighing through their redwoods, had Wolf properly devoted his energies to song transmutation and left Wolf alone to exercise a natural taste and an unbiased judgment. About the time I heard from those trout, Wolf said after a silence of 5 minutes, during which they had swung steadily down the trail, "There'll be a check at the post office, I know, and we'll transmute it into beautiful buckwheat flour, a gallon of maple syrup, and a new pair of overshoes for you. And a beautiful milk from Miss Johnson's beautiful cow," Madge added. "Tomorrow's the 1st of the month, you know." Walt scowled unconsciously, then his face brightened and he clapped his hand to his breast pocket. "Never mind, I have here a nice beautiful new cow, the best milker in California." When did you write it?" she demanded eagerly, then reproachfully. "And you never showed it to me." "I saved it to read to you on the way to the post office in a spot remarkably like this one," he answered, indicating with a wave of his hand a dry log on which to sit. A tiny stream flowed out of a dense fern brake, slipped down a mossy lipstone, and ran across the path at their feet. From the valley arose the mellow song of meadowlarks, while about them, in and out, through the sunshine and shadow, fluttered great yellow butterflies. Up from below came another sound that broke in upon Walt, reading softly from his manuscript. There were a crunching of heavy feet, punctuated now and again by the clattering of a displaced stone. As Walt finished and looked to his wife for approval, a man came into view from around the turn of the trail. He was bareheaded and sweaty, with a handkerchief in one hand, and he mopped his face, while in the other he carried a new hat and a wilted starched collar, which he had removed from his neck. He was a well-built man, and his muscles seemed to the point of busting out of the painfully new and ready-made black clothes he wore. "Warm day," Walt greeted him. Walt believed in country democracy and never missed an opportunity to practice it. The man paused and nodded. "Guess it ain't used to the warm," he vouchsafed, half apologetic. "I'm more accustomed to zero weather." "You shouldn't find any of that in this country," Walt laughed. "Should say not," the man answered. "I ain't here looking for it neither. I'm trying to find my sister. Maybe you know where she lives? Her name's Johnson. It's William Johnson." "You're not a Klondike brother," Madge cried, her eyes bright with interest, "about whom we've heard so much." "Yes, that's me," he answered modestly. "Name's Miller, Skiff Miller. Just thought I'd surprise her." "Oh, you're on the right track then, only you've come by the footpath." Madge stood up and directed him, pointing to the canyon a quarter mile. "You see that blasted redwood? Take the little trail running off to the right. It's a shortcut to our house. You can't miss it." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am," he said. He made tentative effort to go, but seemed awkwardly rooted to the spot. He was gazing at her in open admiration, of which he was quite unconscious, and which was drowning along with him in the rising sea of embarrassment in which he floundered. "We'd like to hear you tell us about the Klondike," Madge said. "Maybe we come over some day while you're at your sister's. Or better yet, why don't you come over and have a dinner with us?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am," he mumbled mechanically. Then he caught himself and added, "I ain't stopping long. Gonna be pulling north again. I go out tonight on a train, you see. I got a mail contract with the government." Madge had said that it was too bad. He made another futile effort to go. But he could not take his eyes from her face. He forgot his embarrassment and his admiration. It was her turn to flush and feel uncomfortable. It was at this juncture, when Walt had just decided it was time for him to be saying something to relieve the strain, that Wolf, who had been away nosing through the brush, trotted wolf-like into view. Skiff Miller's abstraction disappeared. The pretty woman before him passed out of his field of vision. He had eyes only for the dog, and a great wonder came into his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he enunciated slowly and solemnly. He sat down ponderingly on the log, leaving Madge standing. At the sound of his voice, Wolf's ear had flattened down, and his mouth had opened in a laugh. He trotted slowly up to the stranger, and first smelled his hands, then licked them with his tongue. Skiff Miller patted the dog's head, and slowly, solemnly repeated, "Well, I'll be damned." "Excuse me, ma'am," said the next moment. "I was just surprised some, that's all." "We're surprised too," she answered lightly. "We never saw Wolf make up to a stranger before." "Is that what you call him? Wolf?" the man asked. Madge nodded. "But I can understand his friendliness towards you. I can't understand his friendliness towards you, unless it's because you're from the Klondike. He's a Klondike dog, you know." "Yes'm," Miller said absently. He lifted one of Wolf's forelegs and examined the footpads, pressing them and denting them with his thumb. "Kinda soft," he remarked. "He ain't been on trail for a long time." "I say," Wolf broke in, "it's remarkable the way he lets you handle them." Skiff Miller arose, no longer awkward with admiration of Madge, and in a sharp, businesslike manner asked, "How long have you had him?" Just then the dog, squirming and rubbing against the newcomer's legs, opened his mouth and barked. It was an explosive bark, brief and joyous, but a bark. "That's a new one on me," Skiff Miller remarked. Walt and Madge stared at each other. The miracle had happened. Wolf had barked. "That's the first time he ever barked," Madge said. "First time I ever heard him too," Miller volunteered. Madge smiled at him, the man were evidently a humorist. course, she said. You've only seen him for 5 minutes. Skiffmiller looked at her sharply, seeking in her face the guile her words had led her to suspect. I thought you understood, he said sharply. I thought you'd tumbled to it from his making up to me. He's my dog. His name ain't Wolf, it's Brown. Oh, wait, was Madge's indistinct cry to her husband. Walt was on the defensive at once. How do you know he's your dog? He demanded. Because he is, was the reply. Mere assertion, Walt said softly. In his slow and pondering way, Skiffmiller looked at him, and asked with a nod of his head towards Madge, How do you know she's your wife? You just say because she is, and I'll say it's mere assertion. The dog's mine. I bred him and raised him, and I guess I ought to know. Look here, I'll prove it to you. Skiffmiller turned to the dog. Brown! His voice rang out sharply. At the sound, the dog's ears flattened down to a caress. Gee! The dog made a swinging turn to his right. Now, mush on! The dog ceased his swing abruptly and started straight ahead, halting immediately at command. I can do it with whistles, Skiffmiller said proudly. It was my lead dog. Are you not going to take him away with you? Madge asked tremulously. The man nodded. Back into that awful Klondike world of suffering. He nodded and added, Oh, it ain't so bad as all that. Look at me. Pretty healthy specimen, aren't I? But the dogs, that terrible hardship, the heartbreaking toil, the starvation, the frost. Oh, I've read about it. I know. I nearly ate him once over in Little Fish River, Nilla volunteered grimly. If we hadn't gotten a moose that day, it was all that saved him. I'd have died first, Madge cried. Things is different down here, Melon explained. You don't have to eat dogs. You think it's different just about the time you're all in. You've never been all in, so you don't know anything about it. That's the very point, she argued. Dogs are not eaten in California. Why not leave him here? He's happy, he'll never want for food. You know that. He'll never suffer from cold and hardship. Here all is softness and gentleness. Neither the human nor nature is savage. He will never know a whiplash again. As for the weather, why, it never snows here. But it's all a fire hot in summer, you're begging your pardon. Skiffmiller laughed. You do not answer, Madge continued passionately. What have you to offer him in that northland life? Grub, when I got it, and that's most of the time, came the answer. And the rest of the time, no grub. And the work? Yes, plenty of work, Miller blurted out impatiently. Work without end, and famine and frost, and all the rest of the miseries. That's what'll get when he comes with me, but he likes it. He's used to it. He knows that life. He was born to it, and brought up to it. You don't know anything about it. You don't even know what you're talking about. That's where the dog belongs. That's where he'll be happiest. The dog doesn't go, Walt announced in a determined voice. There's no need of further discussion. What's that? Skiffmiller demanded, his brow lowering and an obstinate flash of blood reddening his forehead. I said the dog doesn't go, and that settles it. I don't believe he's your dog. You may have seen him somewhere. You may even sometime have driven him for his owner. His obeying the ordinary driving commands of the Alaskan Trail is no demonstration that he's yours. Any dog in Alaska would obey you as he obeyed. Besides, that is an undoubtedly valuable dog, as dogs go in Alaska, and that is sufficient explanation of your desire to get possession of him. Anyway, you've got to prove property. Skiffmiller, cool and collected, the obstinate flush of a trifle deeper on his forehead, his huge muscles bulging under the black cloth of his coat, carefully looked the par up and down as though measuring the strength of his slenderness. The Klondiker's face took on the contemptuous expression as he said finally, I reckon there's nothing in sight to prevent me taking the dog right here and now. Walt's face reddened, and the striking muscle of his arm and shoulder seemed to stiffen and grow tense. His wife fluttered apprehensively into the breach. Maybe Mr. Miller is right, she said. I'm afraid that he is. Wolf does seem to know him, and certainly he answers to the name of Brown. He made friends with him instantly, and you know that's something he never did with anyone before. Besides, look at the way he barked. He was just bursting with joy. Joy over what? Without doubt at finding Mr. Miller. Walt's striking muscles relaxed, and his shoulders seemed to droop with hopelessness. I guess you're right, Madge, he said. Wolf isn't Wolf, but Brown, and he must belong to Mr. Miller. Perhaps Mr. Miller will sell him, she suggested. You can buy him. Skiffmiller shook his head, no longer belligerent, but quick to be generous in response to generousness. He had 5 dogs, he said, casting about for the easiest way to temper his refusal. He was the leader. He was the crack team of Alaska. Nothing could touch him. In 1898, I refused $5,000 for the bunch. That was high then anyway, but that was what made the fancy price. We were the team itself. Brown were the best in the team. That winter I refused $1,200 for him. I didn't sell him then, and I ain't to sell him now. Besides, I think I made a lot of that dog. I've been looking for him for 3 years. Made me fair sick when I found he'd been stolen. Not the value of him, but well, I liked him now. Like hell, that's all, begging your pardon. I couldn't believe my eyes when I seen him just now. I thought I was dreaming. But too good to be true. But I were his wet nurse. Put him to bed, snug every night. His mother died and I brought him up in condensed milk, $2 a can. I couldn't afford it in my own coffee. He never knew any mother but me. He used to suck my finger regular. Darn little cuss, that finger right there. Skiff Miller, too overwrought for speech, held up a forefinger for them to see. That very finger, he managed to articulate, as though somehow clinched the proof of ownership beyond the bond of affection. He was still gazing at his extended finger when Madge began to speak. But the dog, she said. You haven't considered the dog. Skiff Miller looked puzzled. Have you thought about him? Have you thought about him? She asked. Then what you're driving at, was the response. Maybe the dog has some choice in the matter, Madge went on. Maybe he has his likes and desires. You've not considered him. You give him no choice. It has never entered your mind that possibly he might prefer California to Alaska. You consider only what you like. You do with him as you would, with a sack of potatoes or a bale of hay. This were a new way of looking at it, and Miller were visibly impressed as he debated it in his mind. Madge took advantage of indecision. If you really love him, what would his happiness to him would be your happiness to him would be your happiness also. She urged. Skiff Miller continued to debate with himself, and Madge stole a glance of exultation to her husband, who looked back warm approval. What do you think? The Klondiker suddenly demanded. It was her turn to be puzzled. What do you mean? She asked. You think he'd sooner stay in California? She nodded her head with possessiveness. I'm sure of it. Skiff Miller again debated with himself, but this time aloud, at the same time running his gaze in a judicial way over the mooted animal. You were a good worker. You've done a heap of work for me. Never loafed on me, and were a Joe Dandy at hammering over our team into shape. He's got a head on him. He can do everything but talk. He knows what you say to him. Look at him now. He knows what we're talking about. The dog were lying at Skiff Miller's feet, head close down on paws, ears erect and listening, and eyes that were quick and eager to follow the sound of speech as it fell from the lips of the first one and the other. There's a lot of work in him yet. He's good for years to come. I do like him. I like him like hell. Once or twice after that, Skiff Miller opened his mouth and closed it again without speaking. Finally he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. Your remarks, ma'am, have some weight to him. Well, the dog's worked hard and maybe he's earned a soft berth and he's got a right to choose. Anyway, we'll leave it up to him. Whatever he says goes. You people stay right here and settle down. I'll say goodbye and walk off casual like. If he wants to stay, he can stay. If he wants to come with me, you let him come. I won't call him to come, and don't you call him to come back. He looked with sudden suspicion at Madge and added, Only you must play fair. No persuading after my back is turned. We'll play fair, Madge began, but Skiff Miller broke on her shoes. I know the way of women, he announced. Their arch is soft. When their arch is touched, they're like the stack of cards. Look at the bottom of the deck, and lie like the devil, begging your pardon, man. I'm only discussing about women in general. I don't know how to thank you, Madge quavered. I don't see as you got any call to thank me, replied. Ground ain't decided yet. Now you won't mind if I go away slow? It's no more fair, seeing as I'll be out of sight inside 100 yards. Madge agreed and added, and I promise you faithfully that we won't do anything to influence him. Well then, I might as well be getting along, Skiff Miller said in the ordinary tones of one departing. This change in his voice, Wolf lifted his head quickly, and still more quickly got to his feet when the man and woman shook hands. He sprang up on his hind legs, resting his forepaw on her hips, at the same time licking Skiff Miller's hand. When the latter shook hands with Wolf repeated this act, resting his weight on Walt and licking both men's hands. It ain't no picnic, I can tell you that, were the Klondiker's last words. He turned and went slowly up the trail. With a distance of 20 feet, Wolf watched him go, himself all eagerness and expectancy, as they went for the man to turn and retrace his steps. Then, with a quick, low whine, Wolf sprang after him, overtook him, caught his hand between his teeth, and with reluctant tenderness, strove gently to make him pause. Failing this, Wolf raced back to where Walt Irvine sat, catching his coat sleeve in the teeth and trying vainly to drag him after the retreating man. Wolf's perturbation began to wax. He desired ubiquity. He wanted to be in his two places at once at the same time, with the old master and the new. Steady, the distance between them was increasing. He sprang about excitedly, making short, nervous leaps and twists, now towards one, now towards the other, painful indecision, not knowing his own mind, desiring both and unable to choose, uttering quick, sharp whines and beginning to pant. He sat down abruptly on his haunches, thrusting his nose upwards, the mouth opening and closing with jerking movements, each time opening wider. These jerking movements were in unison with the recurrent spasms that attacked the throat, each spasm severe and more intense than the preceding one. And in accord with jerk and spasms, the larynx began to vibrate, at first silently, accompanied by the rush of air expelled from lungs, then sounding a low, deep note, the lowest in the register of the human ear. All this was the nervous and muscular preliminary to howling. Just as the howl was on the verge of bursting from the full throat, the wide-open mouth was closed, the paroxysm ceased, and he looked long and steadily at the retreating man. Suddenly Wolf turned his head, and over his shoulder, just as steadily regarded Walt. The appeal was unanswered. Not a word nor a sign did the dog receive, no suggestion and no clue as to what his conduct should be. A glance ahead to where the old master was nearing the curve of the trail excited him again. He sprang to his feet with a whine, and then, struck by a new idea, turned his attention to Madge. Hitherto he had ignored her, but now, both masters failing him, she alone was left. He went over to her and snuggled his head in her lap, nudging her arm with his nose, an old trick of his when begging for favours. He backed away from her and began writhing and twisting playfully, curvetting himself, prancing, half-rearing and striking his forepaws to the earth, struggling with all his body from the wheedling eyes and flattening ears to the waggling tail to express the thought that it was in him and that was denied him utterance. This too he soon abandoned. He was depressed by the coldness of these humans who had never been cold before. No response could he draw from them, no help could he get. They did not consider him, they were as dead. He turned and silently gazed after the old master. Skiff Miller were rounding the curve. In a moment he would be gone from view. Yet he never turned his head, plodding straight onwards, slowly and methodically, as though possessed of no interest in what were occurring behind his back. And in this fashion he went out of view. Wolf waited for him to reappear. He waited a long minute, silently, quietly, without movement, as though turned to stone, with all stone quick with eagerness and desire. He barked once and waited, then he turned and trotted back to Walt Irvine. He sniffed his hand and dropped down heavily at his feet, watching the trail where it curved emptily from view. A tiny stream slipping down the mossy-lipped stone seemed suddenly to increase in the volume of its gurgling noise. Save for the meadowlarks, there were no other sound. The great yellow butterflies drifted silently through the sunshine and lost themselves in the drowsy shadows. Madge gazed triumphantly at her husband. A few minutes later, Wolf got up on his feet. Decision and deliberation marked his movement. He did not glance at the man and woman. His eyes were fixed upon the trail. He had made up his mind. They knew it, and they knew, so far as they were concerned, that the ordeal had just begun. He broke into a trot, and Madge's lips pursed, forming an avenue for the caressing sound that it was the will of her to send forth. But the caressing sound was not made. She was impelled to look at her husband, and she saw the sternness with which he watched her. The pursed lips relaxed, and she sighed inaudibly. Wolf's trot broke into a run. Wider and wider were the leaps he made. And once did he turn his head, his wolf's brush standing out straight behind him. He cut sharply across the curve of the trail and were gone. And that's the end. I've said before that I didn't know much about dogs. And in the reading of this Jack London stuff, I think I've come to understand them a lot better than I used to. It's left me with quite a lot of pity for them. It seems a poor thing to be a dog. I think I talked about in my last reading The White Fang, the idea that the sort of divinity or the godhead placed upon men by dogs was something I've never before considered could be a malevolent thing, could be a cruel thing that was done to them. But I thought dogs served willingly, but it occurred to me only then that, well, that the will and servitude was a lie, and that in actual fact, the making of them servile and loyal was cruelty. Because it was, obviously it's cruelty. Plain to me now, but, what am I saying? But I think it seems to me that this perhaps is the cruelest example of this we've seen. We've seen crueler masters, of course. Saw Beauty Smith, it's beaten, but if you consider the compulsion of the service of dogs as a cruelty, and this is the greatest cruelty of all, but you've compelled a dog to serve two masters, two compulsions, which, as described in White Fang, would mean that to lack either one of them would be as an hollowness, an empty void in his life. And so by taming him again, making him twice tame, his dog has been condemned to always have such a void in his life, an hollowness. That being the case, and without understanding, it's clear why he went after Miller, because for all the time he knew his second master, he was already feeling the void of the lack of the Miller, and so his time with them characterised by one void that were fulfilled and one that went unfulfilled, whereas the time he had spent with Miller would have been categorised by a void that were always fulfilled. And I suspect that the part we don't see after this is him adjusting to a new life where he finds that his life with Miller has his first void fulfilled but his second new one unfulfilled. It's a terrible and cruel thing. And in many ways this seems to sort of line up with Call of the Wild and White Fang, where they two seem to be opposite to each other, the White Fang being the inversion of Call of the Wild. This seems to be the sort of marriage between the two, the halfway point, where a dog has come in from the wild and is now heading back out again. Not a full wolf, but a dog more like a wolf. Comes less like one and then comes more like one again. I suppose you could have another inversion where a dog becomes more like a wolf and then becomes less like one again, but I don't know. I wonder how many permutations Jack London can write on a dog becoming another sort of dog or a wolf. This makes at least 3 so far. Well, I suppose in To Build a Fire you get something of that as well, but there's no great transformation in that. Lower Life lacks much of the dog and wolf stuff, where there is a wolf, but has much of the transformation about it. It would seem that these are the 2 great elements of Jack London, at least to my mind. Wolves or dogs, or perhaps canines in general, and transformation. Themes I've seen running through his work. At least that of it which I've read. Having 3 more of his stories to read tonight. I'm making that prediction now and we'll see if it bears fruit or if I look like a fool. But anyway, we've read Brown Wolf. So let's move on now to All Gold Canyon, which does not seem by its name to have much to do with wolves or transformation, but is liable to have to do with money. I think that men covet and are fools about, which I do not fully understand. Let me just have a quick drink of water, just to wet my throat. Doing pretty well so far. That's 3 books done tonight, and 2 of them was pretty good. I'm flush with cheese at the minute. Lampman said that if I accrue enough, he might offer to trade some of it back for a clock. But he's been very cagey about how much I would need. Mostly because I suspect he's waiting to see how much I can build up and then to take it all away from me to compel me to keep reading. I'm not sure I want to do that, mind, because I quite like having enough cheese to live on. But we'll see how we go. It would be nice to be able to tell time. I mean, Lamp has also been helping me tell time lately, so I could do the bird thing. I don't know what I'm talking to here. I feel the need to talk to someone. Even if there is no response, even if there is no one watching this here. I know that there are others in here. I mean, Lamp obviously, though. The way he talks is not very human. But I know that there are other things in here. Spirits, Lamp calls them, but they can't talk to me. Lamp says they can converse, but not in a way I can understand. Not without having a body to control and possess. Mine's the only one down here, which sort of precludes us from talking. I'm putting this off. I should, if I'm going to get on with it, I should get on with it really. But I don't know. I feel in a sort of strange way. I think I have been since yesterday. No, I have been since yesterday, if I'm honest. I wasn't exactly, I didn't sleep well after that book we read last night. Not sure I slept at all, if I'm honest. Lay in bed for a little while and then got up and got to find the books. That's why I got so many, really. I I do think I got a line on all Jack Londons. I've sort of narrowed down a little area where there's quite a few of them in amongst. The other books they're in amongst is all rotten. Lamp says that the rot that's on them is some sort of formivoric. He eats magic basically, and so the books that are in there that were magic is gotten to and rotted, but the normal ones, which mostly seem to be Jack Londons that are in there, are not so bad off. So I'm hoping I can find more of these. Might just spend tomorrow digging through and getting a big old pile of them, and we'll do a bunch of just Jack London tomorrow, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll save them for a day when I'm in need of an easy day. I don't know. It would be nice to have someone talk to me and talk back. And actually talk back, not just tell me to do things or command me or inform me. Actually talk to me and listen. That's very good at giving directions, and he knows a lot of things, but he doesn't listen to me. Not really. Well, save sometimes in this, and even then only help do things that would help with the pursuing of his agenda. Well, I'm yammering on, wasting time. Let's get to it then, All Gold Canyon. It was the green art of the canyon, where the walls swerved back from the rigid plain and relieved the harshness of the line by making little sheltered nooks and filling it to the brim with sweetness and roundness and softness. Here all things rested. Even the narrow stream ceased its turbulent dam rush long enough to form a quiet pool. Knee deep in the water, with drooping head and half-shut eyes, drowsed a red-coated, many-antlered buck. On one side, beginning at the very lip of the pool, were a tiny meadow, a cool, resilient surface of green that extended to the base of the frowning wall. Beyond the pool, a gentle slope of earth ran up and met the opposing wall. Fine grass covered the slope, grass that was spangled with flowers, with here and there patches of colour, orange and purple and golden. Below, the canyon was shut in. There were no view. The walls leaned together abruptly, and the canyon ended in a chaos of rocks, moss-covered and hidden by a green screen of vines and creepers and boughs of trees. Up the canyon rose far hills and peaks, the big foothills pine-covered and remote. And far beyond, like clouds upon the border of the sky, towered minarets of white, where the Sierra's eternal snows flashed austerely the blazes of the sun. There were no dust in the canyon. The leaves and flowers were clean and virginal. The grass were young velvet. Over the pool, 3 cottonwoods sent their snowy fluffs fluttering down the quiet air. On the slope, the blossoms of the white-wooded manzanita filled the air with springtime odours, while the leaves, wise with experience, were already beginning their vertical twist against the common aridity of summer. In the open spaces on the slope, beyond the farthest shadow reach of the manzanita, posed the mariposa lilies, like so many flights of jewelled moths suddenly arrested and on the verge of trembling into flight again. Here and there, that wood's harlequin, the madrone, permitting itself to be caught by the act of changing its pea-green trunk to madder red, breathed its fragrance in the air from great clusters of waxen bells. Creamy white were these bells, shaped like lilies of the valley, with the sweetness of perfume that is of the springtime. There was not a sight of wind. The air was drowsy with its weight of perfume. It was a sweetness that would have been cloying if the air had been heavy and humid. The air was sharp and thin. It was starlight transmuted into atmosphere, shot through and warmed by sunshine and flower drenched with sweetness. An occasional butterfly drifted in and out through the patches of light and shade, and from all about rose the low and sleepy hum of mountain bees, feasting sybarites that jostled one another good-naturedly at the board, nor found time for rough discourtesy. So quietly did the little stream drip and ripple its way through the canyon that it spoke only in faint and occasional gurgles. The voice of the stream was a drowsy whisper, ever interrupted by dozing and silence, ever lifted up again in the awakenings. The motion of all things was a drifting in the art of the canyon. Sunshine and butterflies drifted in and out among the trees. The hum of the bee and the whisper of the stream were a drifting sound. And the drifting sound and drifting colour seemed to weave together in the making of a delicate, intangible fabric which were the spirit of the place. It were a spirit of peace that were not of death, but of smooth pulsing life, of quietude that were not silence, a movement that were not action, repose that were quick with existence, without being violent with struggle and travail. The spirit of the place with the spirit of the peace of the living, somnolent with the easement and content of prosperity, and undisturbed by rumours of far wars. The red-coated, many-antlered buck acknowledged the lordship of the spirit of the place and dozed, knee-deep with the cool-shaded pool. There seemed no flies to vex him, and he were languid with rest. Sometimes his ears moved when the stream awoke, and whispered, but they moved lazily with foreknowledge that it were merely the stream grown garrulous and disarrayed that they had slept. There came a time when the buck's ears lifted and tensed with swift eagerness for sound. His head would turn down the canyon. His sensitive, quavering nostrils scented the air. His eye could not pierce the green screen through which the stream rippled away. To his ear came the voice of a man. It were a steady, monotonous singing voice. Once the buck heard the harsh clash of metal upon rock. At the sound he snorted with a sudden start that jerked him through the air from the water to meadow. His feet sank into the young velvet while he pricked his ears and again scented the air. Then he stole across the tiny meadow, pausing once and again to listen, and faded away out of the canyon like a wraith, soft-footed without sound. The clash of steel-shod soles against the rocks began to be heard, and the man's voice grew louder. It was raised in a sort of chant and became distinct with nearness, so that the words could be heard. Turn around and turn your face unto them sweet hills of grace, powers of sin yon scorching. Look about and look around, fling your sin pack on the ground, you will meet with the Lord this morning in the morning. That was pretty rough even by my standards. The sound of scrambling accompanied the song, and the spirit of the place fled away on the heels of the red-coated buck. The green screen would burst asunder, and a man peered out the meadow and the pool and the sleeping side hill. He were a deliberate sort of man. He took in the scene with one embracing glance, then ran his eyes over the details to verify the general impression. Then, and not until then, did he open his mouth and visit in solemn approval. Smoke of life and smakes of purgatory. Will you just look at that? Woods and water and grass and a side hill, a pocket hunter's delight and a coyote's paradise. Cool green for tired eyes, pink peels for pale people, ain't in it? A secret pasture for prospectors and a resting place for tired burros, by damn. He was a sandy complexioned man, in whose face geniality and humour seemed the salient characteristics. He wore a mobile face, quick changing to inward mood and thought. Thinking was in him a visible process. Ideas chased across his face like the wind flays across the surface of a lake. His hair, sparse and unkempt to growth, was an indeterminate and colourless as his complexion. It would seem that all the colour of his frame had gone into his eyes, for they were startlingly blue. Also they were laughing and merry eyes, within them much of the naivety and wonder of the child, yet in an unintrusive way they contained much of calm self-reliance and strength of purpose found upon self-experience and experience of the world. Sorry, my throat is giving me a little bit of grief today. Just gonna have a quick sup, a sip of water, settle it down. And maybe a little bit more than I can chew. But we'll see how we get along, From the screen of vines and creepers, he flung ahead of him a miner's pick and shovel and gold pan, and he crawled out himself into the open. He was clad in faded overalls and black cotton shirt, with hobnailed brogans on his feet, and on his head a hat whose shapelessness and stains advertised the rough usage of wind and rain and sun and camp smoke. He stood erect, seeing the wide-eyed secrecy of the scene, and sensuously inhaling the warm, sweet breath of the canyon garden through the nostrils that dilated and quivered with delight. His eyes narrowed the laughing slits of blue, his face wreathed itself in joy, and his mouth curled in a smile as he cried aloud, "Jumping dandelions and happy hollyhocks, but that smells good to me. Talk about your attar of roses and cologne factories, they ain't in it." He had the habit of soliloquy, and his quick change in facial expression might tell every thought and mood, but the tongue perforce ran hard after, repeating like a second Boswell. The man lay down on the lip of the pool and drank long and deep of his water. "Tastes good to me," he murmured, lifting his head and gazing across the pool at the side hill, while he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. The side hill attracted his attention. Still lying on his stomach, he studied the hill formation long and carefully. It were a practice eye that travelled up the slope to the crumbling canyon wall and back down against the edge of the pool. He scrambled to his feet and favoured the side hill with a second survey. "Looks good to me," he concluded, picking up his pick and shovel and gold pan. He crossed the stream below the pool, stepping agilely from stone to stone. When the sidle touched the water, he dug up a shovel full of dirt, putting it into the gold pan. He squatted down, holding the pan in his two hands, and partly immersing it in the stream. He imparted to the pan a deft circular motion that sent the water sluicing in and out through the dirt and gravel. The larger and lighter particles worked to the surface, and these, by a skillful dip and movement of the pan, he spilled out and over the edge. Occasionally, to expedite matters, he rested the pan and with his fingers raked out large pebbles and pieces of rock. The contents of the pan diminished rapidly until only fine dirt and the smallest bits of gravel remained. At this stage he began to work very deliberately and carefully. It were a fine washing, and he washed finer and finer, with a keen scrutiny and delicate, fastidious touch. At last the pan seemed empty of everything but water, but with a quick semicircular flirt that sent the water flying over the shallow rim into the stream, he disclosed a layer of black sand on the bottom of the pan. So thin was this layer that it was like a streak of paint. He examined it closely. In the midst of it were a tiny golden speck. He dribbled a little water in over the depressed edge of the pan. With a quick flirt he sent the water sluicing across the bottom, turning the grains of black sand over and over. A second tiny golden speck rewarded his effort. The washing had now become very fine, fine beyond all need of ordinary place of mind. He worked the black sand, a small portion at a time, up the shallow rim of the pan. Each small portion he examined sharply, so that his eyes saw every grain of it before he allowed it to slide over the edge and away. Jealously, bit by bit, he let the black sand slip away. A golden speck, no larger than a pinpoint, appeared on the rim. By his manipulation of the water, it returned to the bottom of the pan. In such a fashion, another speck was dislodged, and another. Great were his care of them. Like a shepherd, he herded his flock of golden specks, so that not one should be lost. At last, to the pan of dirt, nothing remained but his golden herd. He counted it, and then, after all his labour, sent it flying out of the pan with one final swirl of water. But his blue eyes were shining with desire as he rose to his feet. 7, he muttered aloud, and certain the summer specks for which he had toiled, so hard and which he had so wantonly thrown away. 7, he repeated with the emphasis of one trying to impress a number on his memory. He stood still a long while, surveying the hillside. In his eyes was a curiosity newly aroused and burning. There was an exultance about his bearing, and a keenness like that of a hunted animal catching a fresh scent of game. He moved down the stream a few steps and took a second pan of dirt. Again came the careful washing, the jealous herding of the golden specks, and the wantonness with which he sent them flying into the stream when he had counted their number. 5, he repeated, 5. He could not forbear another survey of the hill before filling the pan farther down the stream. His golden herd diminished. 4, 3, 2, 2, 1 were his memory tabulations. He moved down the stream. When but one speck of gold rewarded his washing, he stopped and built a fire of dried twigs. Into this he thrust the gold pan and burned it till it blew back. He held the pan and examined it critically. Then he nodded approbation. Against such a colour background he could defy the tiniest yellow speck to elude him. Still moving down the stream, he panned again. A single speck was his reward. A third pan contained no gold at all. Not satisfied with this, he panned another 3 times again, taking the shovels of dirt within a foot of one another. Each pan proved empty of gold, and the fact, instead of discouraging him, seemed to give him satisfaction. His elation increased with each barren washing until he arose, exclaiming jubilantly, "If it ain't the real thing, may God knock off my head with sour apples." Returned to where he had started the operation, he began to pan up the stream. First his golden herds increased prodigiously. 14, 18, 21, 26 ran his memory tabulations. Just above the pool he struck his richest pan, 35 collars. "Almost enough to save," he remarked regretfully as he allowed the water to sweep them away. The sun climbed to the top of the sky. The man worked on. Pan by pan he went up the stream, the tally results steadily decreasing. Just a bootful the way it peters out, he exulted, when the shovelful of dirt contained no more than a single speck of gold. And when no specks at all were found in several pans, he straightened up and favoured the hillside with a confident glance. "Aha, Mr. Pocket!" he cried out, as though it were an order hidden somewhere above him, beneath the surface of the slope. "Aha, Mr. Pocket, I'm a-comin', and I'm surely gwine get you. You hear me, Mr. Pocket? I'm gwine get you, sure as pumpkins ain't cauliflowers." He turned and flung a measuring glance at the sun, poised above him in the azure of the cloudless sky. Then he went down the canyon, following the line of shovel holes he had made, filling the pans. He crossed the stream below the pool and disappeared through the green screen. There were little opportunity for the spirit of the place to return with its quietude and repose, for the man's voice, raised in raging song, still dominated the canyon with possession. After a time, with a greater clashing of steel-shod feet on rock, he returned. The green screen was tremendously agitated. It surged back and forth in the throes of struggle. There were a loud grating and clanging of metal. The man's voice leaped to a higher pitch and was sharp with imperativeness. A large body plunged and panted. There was a snapping and ripping, rending, and amid a shower of fallen leaves an horse burst through the screen. On its back were a pack, and from this trailed broken vines and torn creepers. The animal gazed with astonished eyes at the scene into which it had been precipitated, then dropped its head to the grass and began contentedly to graze. A second horse scrambled into view, slipping once on the mossy rock and regaining equilibrium when its hoof sank in the yielding surface of the meadow. It were riderless, though on its back was a high-horned Mexican saddle, scarred and discoloured by long usage. The man brought up the rear. He threw off the pack and saddle with on either camp location, gave the animals their freedom to graze. He unpacked his food and got out a frying pan and coffee pot. He gathered an armful of dry wood and with a few stones made a place for his fire. "My," he said, "but I've got an appetite. I could scoff iron filings and horseshoe nails, and thank you kindly, man, for a second helping." He straightened up, and while he reached for matches in the pocket of his overalls, his eyes travelled across the pool to the side hill. His fingers had clutched the matchbox, but they relaxed their hold, and his hand came out empty. The man wavered perceptibly. He looked at his preparations for cooking, and he looked at his hill. "Guess I'll take another whack at her," he concluded, staring across the stream. "Ain't no sense in her, I know," he mumbled apologetically, "but keeping grub back an hour ain't gonna hurt none, I reckon." A few feet back from his first line of test pans, he started a second line. The sun dropped down the western sky, the shadows lengthened, but the man worked on. He began a third line of test pans. They were cross-cutting the hillside, line by line, as he ascended. The centre of each line produced the richest pans, while the ends came where no colour showed in the pan. And as he ascended the hillside, the lines grew perceptibly shorter. The regularity with which their length diminished served to indicate that somewhere up the slope the last line would be so short as to have scarcely length at all, and that beyond could come only a point. The design would grow into an inverted V. The convergent sides of this V marked the boundaries of the gold-bearing dirt. The apex of the V were evidently the man's goal. Often he ran his eye along the convergent sides and up the hill, trying to divine the apex, the point where the gold-bearing dirt must cease. Here resided Mr. Pocket, for so the man familiarly addressed the imaginary point above him on the slope, crying out, come down out of that, Mr. Pocket. Be right smart and agreeable, and come down." "All right," he would add later in a voice resigned to determination. "All right, Mr. Pocket. Explain to me I've got to come right up and snatch you out bald-headed. And I'll do it, he would threaten still later. Each pound he carried down to the water to wash, and as he went higher up the hill, the bands grew richer, until he began to save the gold in an empty baking powder can which he carried carelessly in his hip pocket. So engrossed was he in his toil that he did not notice the long twilight of oncoming night. It was not until he tried vainly to see the gold colours in the bottom of the pan that he realised the passage of time. He straightened up abruptly, an expression of whimsical wonderment on awe overspread his face as he drawled, "Gosh darn my buttons, if I didn't plumb forget dinner." He stumbled across the stream in the darkness and lighted his long-delayed fire. Flapjacks and bacon warmed over beans constituted his supper. I wouldn't give. Then he smoked a pipe by the smouldering coals, listening to the night noise and watching the moonlight stream through the canyon. After that he unrolled his bed, took off his heavy shoes, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. His face showed white in the moonlight, like the face of a corpse. It was a corpse that knew its resurrection, for the man rose suddenly on one elbow and gazed across the hillside. "Good night, Mr. Pocket," he called sleepily. "Good night." He slept through the early grey of morning, until the direct rays of the sun smote his closed eyelids, when he awoke with a start and looked about him until he had established the continuity of his existence and identified his present self with the days previously lived. To dress he had merely the buckle on his shoes. He glanced at his fireplace and at his hillside, wavered, fought down the temptation and started the fire. "Keep your shirt on, Bill, keep your shirt on," he admonished himself. "What's the good of rushing? No use in getting all het up and sweaty. Mr. Pocket will wait for you. He ain't to run away before you can get your breakfast. Now, what you want, Bill, is something fresh in your bill of fare, so up to you to go up and get it." He cut a short pole at the water's edge, and drew from one of his pockets a bit of line and a draggled fly that had once been a royal coachman. "They were bite in the early morning," he muttered, as he made his first cast in the pool. A moment later he was clearly crying, "What did I tell you? What did I tell you?" No reel nor any inclination to waste time by main strength, and swiftly he drew out of the water a flashing 10-inch trout. 3 more, caught in rapid succession, furnished his breakfast. And counting the stepping stones on his way to the hillside, he was struck by a sudden thought and paused. "I just better take a hike downstream away," he said, There's no telling what cuss may be snooping around. He crossed over on the stones with a, I really ought to take that hike. The need of the precaution passed out of his mind, and he fell to work. At nightfall he straightened up. The small of his back was stiff from stoop and toil, and he put his hand behind him to soothe the protested muscles. He said, "Now what do you think of that, bad Dan? I clean forgot my dinner again. If I don't watch out, I'll sure be degenerating into a 2 meals a day crank. Pockets is the damnedest thing I ever seen for making a man absent-minded," he commented that night. He crawled into his blanket. "Nor did you forget to call up the hillside. Good night, Mr. Pocket. Good night." Rising with the sun and snatching a hasty breakfast, he was early at work. A fever seemed to be growing in him, nor did the increasing richness of the test pan delay this fever. There was a flush on his cheek other than that made by the heat of the sun, and he were oblivious to fatigue and the passage of time. When he filled the pan with dirt, he ran down the hill to wash it, nor could he forbear running up the hill again, panting and stumbling profanely to refill the pan. He were now 100 yards from the water, and the inverted V were assuming definite proportions. The width of the paved dirt steadily decreased, and the man extended in mind's eye the sides of the V to their meeting place far up the hill. This was his goal, the apex of the V, and he planned many times to locate it. Just about 2 yards above that manzanita bush and a yard to the right, he finally concluded. Then the temptation seized him. "It's plain as the nose in your face," he said, as he abandoned his laborious cross-cut and climbed for the indicated apex. He filled a pan and carried it down the hill to wash it. It contained no trace of gold. He dug deep and he dug shallow, filling and washing a dozen pans, and was unrewarded even by even the tiniest golden speck. He was enraged at having yielded to the temptation, and cursed himself blasphemously and pridelessly. And he went down the hill and took up the cross-cutting. "Slow and certain, Bill, slow and certain," he grinned. "Shortcuts to fortune ain't in your line, and it's about time you know it. Get wise, Bill, get wise. Slow and certain's the only hand you can play, so go to it and keep to it too." The crosscuts decreased, showing that the sides of the V were a conversion and the depths of the V increased. The gold trace was dipping into the hill. They were only at 30 inches beneath the surface that he could get colour in his pan. The dirt he found at 25 inches from the surface and at 35 inches yielded barren pans. At the base of the V, by the water's edge, he had found the gold colours in the grass roots. The higher he went up the hill, the deeper the gold dipped. To dig a hole 3 feet deep in order to get one test pan was a task of no mean magnitude, while between the man and the apex intervened an untold number of such holes to dig. "There's no telling how much deeper it'll pitch," he sighed in a moment's pause, while his fingers soothed his aching back. Feverish with desire, with aching back and stiffened muscles, with pick and shovel gouging and mauling the soft brown earth, the man tore up the hill. Before him were smooth slopes, sangled with flowers and made sweet with their breath. Behind him with devastation, it looked like some terrible eruption breaking out on the smooth skin of the hill. His slow progress was like that of a slug, befouling beauty with monstrous trail. Through the dipping gold trace increased the man's work. Though the dipping gold trace increased the man's work, he found consolation in the increasing richness of the pans. 20 cents, 30 cents, 50 cents, 60 cents were the values of the gold found in the pans. At nightfall he washed his pan a pan which gave him $1 worth of gold dust from a shovelful of dirt. "I just bet it's my luck to have some inquisitive cuss come bun up here on my pasture," he mumbled cheaply in the night, and he pulled the blanket up to his chin. Suddenly he sat upright. "Bill," he called sharply, "now listen to me, Bill, do you hear? It's up to you tomorrow morning to nosy round and see what you can see, understand? Tomorrow morning, and don't you forget it." He yawned, glanced across at his side then. "Good night, Mr. Pocket," he called. In the morning he stole a march from the sun, for he had finished breakfast when its first rays caught him, and he was climbing the wall of the canyon where it crumbled away and gave footing. From the outlook at the top he found himself in the midst of a loneliness. As far as he could see, chain after chain of mountains heaved themselves into his vision. To the east his eyes, leaping the miles between range and range, between many ranges, brought up at last against the white-peaked Sierras, the main crest, where the backbone of the western world reared itself against the sky. To the north and south he could see more distinctly the cross systems that broke through the main trend of the sea of mountains. To the west the ranges fell away, one behind the other, diminishing and fading into the gentle foothills that, in turn, descended into the great valley which he could not see. In all that mighty sweep of earth he saw no sign of man nor the handiwork of man, save only the torn bosom of the hillside at his feet. The man looked long and carefully. Once, far down his own canyon, he thought he saw a faint hint of smoke. He looked again and decided that it was the pale haze of the hills made dark by convolution of the canyon wall at his back. Hey you, Mr. Pocket, he called down in the canyon. Stand out from under. I'm a-comin', Mr. Pocket. I'm a-comin'. The heavy brogans on the man's feet made him appear clumsy-footed, but he swung down from the giddy height as lightly and airily as a mountain goat. A rock turned under his foot on the edge of the precipice did not disconcert him. He seemed to know the precise time required to turn the culminating disaster, and in the meantime he utilised the false foot in itself for a momentary earth contact necessary to carry him on to safety. When the earth sloped so steeply that it were impossible to stand for a second upright, the man did not hesitate. His foot pressed the impossible surface for about a fraction of the fatal second, and gave him a bound that carried him onwards. Again, where even the fraction of a second's foot were out of the question, he would swing his body past by a moment's hand grip on a jilted cut knob of rock, a crevice, or a precariously rooted shrub. At last, with a wild leap and yell, he exchanged the face of the wall for an earth slide, and finished the descent in the midst of several tons of sliding earth and gravel. His first pound of the morning washed out over $2 in coarse gold. It was from the centre of the V. For either side, the diminution of values in the pans was swift. His lines of cross-cutting holes were growing very short, and the convergent sides of the insides of the inverted V were only a few yards apart. The meeting point were only a few yards above him. The pay streak were dipping deeper and deeper into the earth. By early afternoon, he was sinking the test holes 5 feet before pans could show the gold trace. For that matter, the gold trace had become something more than a trace. It were a placer mine in itself, and the man resolved to come back after he had found the pocket and work over the ground. The increase in richness of the pans began to worry him. By late afternoon, the worth of the pans had grown to $3 and $4. The man scratched his head perplexedly and looked a few feet up the hill at the manzanita bush that marked approximately the apex of the V. He nodded his head and said oracularly, "It's one of two things, Bill. One of two things. Either Mr. Pocket spilled himself all out and down the hill, or else Mr. Pocket's that damn rich you won't be able to carry him all the way with you. And that'd be hell, wouldn't it?" He chuckled at contemplation of so pleasant a dilemma. Nightfall found him by the edge of the stream, his eyes wrestling with the gathering darkness over the washing of a $5 pan. "Wished I had an electric light to go on working," he said. He found sleep difficult that night. Many times he composed himself and closed his eyes for slumber to overtake him. But his blood pounded with too strong desire, and many times his eyes opened and he murmured wearily, "Wished it was sun up." Sleep came to him in the end, but his eyes were open with the first paling of the stars. The grey of dawn caught him with breakfast finished, and climbing the hillside in the direction of the secret abiding place of Mr. Pocket. The first cross-cut the man made, there was space for only 3 holes, so narrow had become the pay streak, and so close was he to the fountainhead of the golden stream he had been following for 4 days. "Bit calm, Bill, bit calm," he admonished himself, as he broke ground for a final hole where the sides of the V had at last come together into a point. "I've got the almighty cinch on you, Mr. Pocket, and you can't lose me," he said many times as he sank the hole deeper and deeper. 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, he dug his way down to the earth. The digging grew harder. His pick grated on broken rock. He examined the rock. Rotten quartz was his conclusion as with the shovel he cleared the bottom of the hole, a loose dart. He attacked the crumbling quartz with the pick, bursting the disintegrating rock asunder with every stroke. He thrust his shovel into the loose mass. His eye got a gleam of yellow. He dropped the shovel and squatted suddenly on his heels. As a farmer rubs the clinging earth from fresh dug potatoes, so the man, a piece of rotten quartz held in both hands, rubbed the dirt away. "Suffering Sardinopolis," he cried. "Lumps and chunks of it. Lumps and chunks of it." There were only half a rock he held in his hands. The other half were virgin gold. He dropped it into his pan and examined another piece. Little yellow were to be seen, but with his strong fingers he crumbled the rotten quartz away until both hands were filled with glowing yellow. He rubbed the dirt away from fragment after fragment, tossed them into the gold pan. It were a treasure hole, so much that had the quartz rotted away that there were less of it than there were of gold. Now and again he found a piece to which no rock clung, a piece that were all gold. A chunk where the pick had laid open the heart of the gold glittered like a handful of yellow jewels, and he cocked his head at it and slowly turned it around and over to observe the rich play of the light upon it. "Talk about your too much gold diggings," the man snorted contemptuously. "Aye, this digging'll make it look like 30 cents. This digging is all gold, and right here and now I name this here canyon All Gold Canyon, b'gosh." Still squatting on his heels, he continued to examine the fragments and toss them into the pan. Suddenly there came to him a premonition of danger. It seemed a shadow had fallen upon him, but there were no shadow. His heart had given a great jump up into his throat and was choking him. Then his blood slowly chilled, and he felt the sweat of the shirt cold against his flesh. He did not spring up, nor look around. He did not move. He was considering the nature of the premonition he had received, trying to locate the source of the mysterious force that had warned him, striving to sense the imperative presence of the unseen thing that threatened him. There is an aura of things hostile, made manifest by a messenger, too refined for the senses to know, and this aura he felt, but he knew not how he felt it. His was the feeling as when a cloud passes over the sun. It seemed that between him and the life had passed something dark, smothering and menacing, a gloom as it were, that swallowed up life and made for death, his death. Every force of his being impelled him to spring up and confront the unseen danger. His soul dominated the panic, and he remained squatting on his heels, in his hands a chunk of gold. He did not dare to look around, but he knew by now that there was something behind him and above him. He made believe to be interested in the gold in his hand. He examined it critically, turned it over and over, and rubbed the dirt from it. And all the time he knew that something behind him was looking at all the gold over his shoulder. Still feeling interest in the chunk of gold in his hand, he listened intently, and he heard the breathing of the thing behind him. His eyes searched the ground in front of him for a weapon, but he saw only the uprooted gold, worthless to him now in his extremity. It was his pick, an handy weapon on occasion, but this was not such an occasion. The man realised his predicament. He were in a narrow hole that was 7 feet deep. His head did not come up to the surface of the ground. He were in a trap. He remained squatting on his heels. He was quite cool and collected, but his mind, considering every factor, showed him only his helplessness. He continued rubbing the dirt from the quartz fragments and throwing the gold in the pan. There was nothing else for him to do. Yet he knew he would have to rise up sooner or later and face the danger that breathed at his back. The minutes passed, and with the passage of each minute he knew that by so much he was nearer the time when he must stand up, or else, and his wet shirt went cold against his flesh at the thought, or else he might receive death as he stooped there over his treasure. Still he squatted on his heels, rubbing the dirt from gold and debating in just what manner he should rise up. He might rise up with a rush and claw his way out of the hole to meet whatever threatened on the even footing above ground. He might rise up slowly and carelessly and feign casualty to discover the thing that breathed at his back. His instinct and every fighting fibre of his body favoured the mad clawing rush to the surface. His intellect and the craft thereof favoured the slow and cautious meeting with the thing, menaced in which he could not see. And while he debated, a loud crashing noise burst in onto his ear the same instant he received a stunning blow on the left side of his back. From the point of impact felt a rush of flame through his flesh. He sprang up in the air, but halfway to his feet collapsed. His body crumpled in like a leaf weathered in southern heat, and he came down, his chest across his pan of gold, his face in the dirt and rock, his legs tangled and twisting because of the restricted space at the bottom of the hole. His legs twitched convulsively several times. His body was shaken as with a mighty org. There were a slow expansion of the lungs, accompanied by a deep sigh, and the air was slowly, very slowly exhaled, and his body slowly flattened itself down to inertness. Above, a revolver in hand, the man was peering down over the edge of the hole. He peered for a long time at the prone and motionless body beneath him. After a while, the stranger sat down on the edge of the hole so that he could see into it, and rested the revolver on his knee. Reaching his hand into a pocket, he drew up a whisper-bound paper. Into this, he dropped a few crumbs of tobacco. The combination became a cigarette, brown and squat, with the ends turned in. Not once did he take his eyes from the body at the bottom of the hole. He lighted the cigarette and drew its smoke into his lungs with a caressing intake of breath. He smoked slowly. Once the cigarette went out, he relighted it. All the while he studied the body beneath him. In the end, he tossed the cigarette stub away and rose to his feet, moved to the edge of the hole, spanning it, a hand rested on each edge, with the revolver still in his right hand. He muscled his body down into the hole. When his feet were a yard from the bottom, he released his hands and dropped down. At the instant his feet struck bottom, he saw the pocket miner's arms lean out, and his own legs knew a swift jerk and grip that overthrew him. In the nature of the jump, his revolver hand were above his head. Swiftly the grip had flashed about his legs. Just as swiftly he brought the revolver down. He was still in the air, his fall still in process of completion when he pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. The smoke filled the hole so that he could see nothing. He struck the bottom on his back, and like a cat's, the pocket miner's body was on top of him. Even as the miner's body passed on top, the stranger crooked in his right arm to fire, and even in that instant the miner, with a quick thrust of elbow, struck his wrist. The muzzle was thrown up and the bullet thudded in the dirt at the side of the hole. The next instant the stranger felt the miner's hand grip his wrist. The struggle went out for the revolver. Each man strove to turn it against the other's body. The smoke in the hole was clearing. The stranger, lying on his back, was beginning to see dimly. and suddenly you were blinded by a handful of dirt deliberately flung in his eyes by these antagonists. In that moment of shock, his grip on the revolver was broken. In the next moment, he felt a smashing darkness descend upon his brains, and in the midst of darkness, even the darkness ceased. But the pocket miner fired again and again until the revolver were empty. Then he tossed it from him, and breathing heavily, sat down on the dead man's legs. The miner was sobbing and struggling for breath. Measly skunk, he panted, camping on my trail, let me do the work and then shooting me in the back. He was half crying from anger and exhaustion. He peered at the face of the dead man. It was sprinkled with loose dirt and gravel, and it was difficult to distinguish the features. Never laid eyes on him before, the miner concluded in his scrutiny. Just a common and ordinary thief, damn him. He shot me in the back! He shot me in the back! He opened his shirt and felt himself front and back on his left side. And clean through, no harm gone, he cried jubilantly. I'll bet he aimed all right. He drew the gun over when he pulled the trigger, the cuss, but I fixed him, I fixed him. His fingers went to investigate the bullet hole in his side, and a shade of regret asked over his face. It's gonna be stiffer than hell, he said. It's up to me to get it mended and get out of here. He crawled out of the hole and went down the hill to his camp. Half an hour later he returned, leading his pack horse. His open shirt disclosed the rude bandages with which he had dressed the wound. He was slow and awkward with his left-handed movements, but that did not prevent him from using the arm. The bright of the pack rope under the dead man's shoulders enabled him to heave the body out of the hole. Then he set to work gathering up his gold. He worked steadily for several hours, pausing up to rest his stiffening shoulder, and explained, He shot me in the back, the measly skunk. He shot me in the back. When his treasure was quite cleaned up and wrapped securely into a number of blanket-covered parcels, he made an estimate of his value. £400 ramen on top. Say 200 quarts as well. Quarts and dirt. That leaves £200 of gold, Bill. Bill, wake up. £200 of gold. $40,000 and it's gone. All yours. He scratched his head delightedly. His fingers blundered into an unfamiliar groove. They quested along it for several inches. It was a crease through his scalp where the second bullet had ploughed. He walked angrily over the dead man. You would you? He bawled. You would, huh? Well, I'll fix you good and plenty, and I'll give you a decent burial too. That's more than you'd have done for me. He dragged the body to the edge of the hole and toppled it in. It struck the bottom with a dull crash on its side. The face twisted up the light. The miner peered down at him. And you shot me in the back, he said accusingly. With pick and shovel he filled the hole. Then he loaded the gold onto his horse. It was too great a load for the animal, and when he had gained his camp he transferred part of it to his saddle horse. Even so, he was compelled to abandon a portion of his outfit, pick and shovel and gold pan, extra food, cooking utensils, and diverse odds and ends. The sun were at the zenith when the man forced the horses at the screen of vines and creepers. To climb the huge boulders, the animals were compelled to uprear and struggle blindly through the tangled mass of vegetation. Once the saddle horse fell heavily, and the man removed the pack to get the animal on its feet. After it started on his way again, the man thrust his head out from among the leaves and peered up the hillside. The measly skunk, he said, and disappeared. There were ripping and tearing of vines and boughs. The trees surged back and forth, marking the passage of the animals through the midst of them. There was a clash and a steel-shod ooze on stone, and now and again an oath or sharp cry of command. Then the voice of the man were raised in song. Turn around and turn your face unto them sweet hills of grace, the powers of sin your I'm scorning. Look about and look around, fling your sin back underground, you will weep with the Lord in the morning. The song grew fainter and fainter, and through the silence crept back the spirit of the place. The stream once more drowsed and whispered. The hum of the mountain bee rose sleepily. Dawn through the perfumed wave air reflected the snowy fluffs of the cottonwood. The butterflies drifted in and out among the trees, and over all blazed the quiet sunshine. Only remained the hoof marks in the meadow, and the torn hillside to mark the boisterous trail of life that had broken the peace, the place, and passed on. And that's the end of All Gold Canyon. I think probably the end of my reading tonight. I was going to push on and do the rest, but my throat is starting to give out. And we've done 4, that's quite a bit. And no one's here to complain, other than that. I don't think Lamb's going to complain too sourly about it. Oh, you Lamb. So, let's talk about that one then before we call it. So, I'm a little conflicted about that one. God, I do miss the surface. At first I wasn't too sure about your Bill, that man. He came into this place that was so peaceful, so sort of serene. He pulled it apart, broke the peace. But the energy he brought wasn't a bad thing. You were loud and enthusiastic and a bit odd, but you were a good fella. Didn't do no harm to it. And he worked so hard finding the gold. I've got a sort of fascination with gold. I don't understand money, but I've got an idea about gold. It's a thing, you know, it's a symbol of value, a store of wealth. And it shines and it's heavy and it's got a beautiful yellow colour of good cheese. I can understand the love of that. Well, it does seem a wretched thing to shoot a man in the back for. Not of course that I could say I'd shoot a man in the front for it, particularly before I'd do that. If I were in the mood to shoot a man over some gold, I suppose I would want to shoot him in the back rather than the front. I also suspect I'd want to make sure he was dead before I jumped down the hole after him. Still, suppose you get what you get. And it was decent of him to bury the fellow who shot him. And again, I suppose how much gold put a man in a good mood. I don't know how much $40,000 worth of gold is. £200 sounds quite a lot. I doubt I'll weigh a pound. I also don't know exactly when Jack London was writing these, so perhaps the money is a different value now than it was then. Still, he seemed a decent sort. Fool though, for getting you dinner. When you got good food too. And you're in a place so fine you can pull 4 fat fish out of a river for breakfast. And you forget your dinner. And you got bacons and flapjacks and beans, God. I'm going mad for want of company and food. Anyway, I reckon tomorrow would do. House of Pride, Batard, maybe I'll stir myself to go out and grab some more Londons, or go out and have a look around, see if we can't find something else. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just lay in bed all day and then do just those two. Or maybe I won't even do that. Who can say? I feel very strange, really. I guess I'll comment on my predictions, transformation and dogs as London's themes. There were no dogs in this. But I think there was a whiff of his love of the transformation. Man shot at the bottom, lying still, becoming similar to a goat in certain points, but lying there, playing dead, desperate to survive, as a man burned down a cigarette, letting the blood flow out of him without moving. That's a desperate act. That's coming closer to the wolf, I reckon. I reckon indeed. Oh, but my throat is giving me grief. Maybe I do need to take a rest day tomorrow. Just do the 2. That'd probably count, right? That wouldn't be much. Give my voice a rest. I'd ask you if you minded, but there's no one here to ask. Set a lamp. And lamp don't even make me read a book a day. We got our deal going. Well, I hope if you are listening to this, someone, I hope you enjoy. And I hope sometime that you'll come along and hang around while I do these and talk to me. I think I'm going to go and maybe get some sleep. I wish you well. Ta-ra.